I'm chairing the committee tonight. The meeting is a virtual meeting using video conference facilities, and it's being streamed live on YouTube. I'm supported in managing the meeting by a senior officer. The senior officer is Maria Taylor, one of our directors. I'll explain why in a second, why we haven't got our usual director, Tony. And you will hear me from time to time talking to Maria. Maria will be counting up who is to speak next, and she will be making the list and passing me over as soon as she has people that wish to speak. Also, when officers want to speak. So if you do hear her voice, it's not because she's running the meeting. That's mostly her role tonight, which is getting the list of speakers and when officers need to speak. You will also, I will be referring to all councillors of the name councillor, and also I will be referring to all officers by their Christian names. There are two planning officers here tonight called Catherine and Chung, both lady planning officers. Our legal man is our legal planning expert is Mustafa. Okay, and as I've just said, one of our directors is Maria Taylor. So when I call those particular people, they are officers. And we also have Marina, who's the important part, who's taking all the notes and counting the votes at the end of the evening, at the end of the applications. Right, we will start in a minute with a roll call, but before we get to that, just a bit of housekeeping. Right, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, because we have heard dogs barking, telephones ringing, and wives calling and husbands calling. So please mute or make sure everything's quiet. Speakers are registered to speak will have 3 minutes when they ask to speak. And when the 3 minutes is up, you'll hear a tone. That means please stop or please finish within a few seconds. And that's the only opportunity you have to speak. Please don't clap, cheer or boo. I'm sure you won't. And after each application, when a recommendation has been made, a resolution has been made, either vote for the resolution, against the resolution, or abstain. Now, when I say the resolution, it doesn't mean the application. It means whether you want the application to be approved or not to be approved. So if the recommendation is to approve it, you'll vote for it. If it's not, you'll vote against it. Okay, I think we've got all that point. Over to you, Marina, for a roll call then of all the councillors, please, so that members of the public are aware.
If the committee members could just declare that they can hear and see proceedings, please. Councillor Chandler.
Yes, I'm here and I can hear and see.
Councillor Cribbin.
Yes, I can hear and see.
Councillor Dabbs.
Yes, I can see and hear.
Councillor Frost.
Hi, good evening.
Councillor Harris.
Yes, on both counts.
Councillor Irving Swift.
Yes, I can, thank you.
Councillor James.
Yes, I can see and hear.
Councillor Longley.
Yes, I can see and hear, thank you.
Councillor Matton.
Hello, yes, I can see and hear, thank you.
Councillor Parker.
Yes, thank you on both counts.
Councillor Ritchie.
Yes to both.
Councillor Robertson.
Yes to both.
Councillor Smith.
All good. Councillor
Wesley.
Yes to all.
And Chairman.
I'm here, yeah. That's full lot here tonight then, Marina.
Yep.
Marvellous. Right, we go on to item 1, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Is it your wish that when possible they be signed as a true and correct record, please, members?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Everybody agree?
Yeah.
Nobody against? Nobody against. Okay, the minutes are correct, Marina, and they will be signed as so when we're able to get round to it. Right. Apologies for absence. Obviously, there's none. Members' interest. Disclosable interest for a start? None?
Chair, just one item, item 3, Brixworth. It makes reference to the conservation area. I live in the conservation area, but I'm not anywhere near the actual planning application.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, there's a hand up there I can see. Councillor Longley.
Yeah, item 4 in Hannington. I used to rent a property to the company that is applying some years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman,
No others?
can I just come in regarding item 3, Brixworth?
Yeah.
It's a question really. I mean, with regard to the cooperative society, I don't know whether other members are the same, but I'm actually a member of the cooperative society by virtue of having one of their loyalty cards and can vote at their annual general meetings and things. I don't know whether that's an interest that we need to disclose or whether it's something that is incidental. Appreciate some advice on that.
I'm sure our solicitor will tell us if I have one as well, so we better make sure. Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, likewise, Hannington, I happen to know, but that's all. Just know one of the directors of the applicant.
Right, you don't socialise with them, do you?
Well, I've never been to his house for dinner, if that's what you mean.
Right. Okay. Councillor Ritchie.
Just to go further, if it needs to be on the record, you would see in many cases, I am here having been elected as a Labour and cooperative councillor. My link, however, is purely by name.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. I will check with, do we have, is our solicitor here, Mustafa?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Did you hear the declarations of interest by members? We have a co-op application on, and some people are have co-op membership of their local co-op, and we also have a politician that's affiliated. The co-op is affiliated, or he's affiliated. The Labour Party is. So, do they have an interest or not?
Yeah, I think that it was Councillor Ritchie, if I'm right. We completely ignore that because that is the Labour and cooperative. So I wouldn't, with all respect, obviously it's important for him to be a cooperative member. What I meant is, in terms of the planning committee, it's irrelevant. I think there was one who was socially involved, knew someone in the co-op. Is that was, and then there was someone who was a voting member. In that case, I would just refer to it in the notes that Marina is taking, that there was a declaration that if someone is, I wasn't entirely clear because I was fidgeting in my own system, that right. The last one was I think one councillor was socially knew someone within.
Oh, that was me. I know the guy, but unless I know him, I know a lot of people. I know all of you lot for a start. No, I'm not socially involved with him.
Okay, that's incidental.
Okay, and going back to the co-op, but if you shop at the co-op, you get a card.
No, I wouldn't. As I said, I would just declare because technically you're voting, just as it's a declaration of interest.
Okay, well I declare it as well then.
Suppose you whatever.
Okay, thank you for your advice, sir.
Yeah, as long as it's down that I declared that as well, Councillor Cribbin.
You did indeed, Daniel.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Party whipping arrangements. Okay.
None, Chairman.
Members of the public, that means we don't get together as groups, either political groups or any other groups, and decide how we're going to vote beforehand. We make decisions after hearing all the everything this evening. Right. Applications withdrawn. There are two Daventry applications on. The first of the two, which I'm looking carefully at the number, is 0246. That is deferred for for amended plans, so we won't be dealing with that one tonight. Now the second Daventry one the date hasn't run out for any comments to be made yet. But it's the sort of application, it's only on here because it's one of Daventry's council's own applications. So I am asking you as a committee, before we hear other applications, that should we not receive any objections at all to the application, that the application be approved and delegated to officers. If there's any objections or any comments at all from members, it will come straight back to committee. So I'm putting that to you before we go to the planning applications. So whether you,
Chairman.
I beg your pardon?
I agree with you, Chairman.
Right. Well, you've all got to agree. So does anybody, let's put it like this, it's easier. Does anybody disagree with that position? Right. So you're all happy that, subject to no comments at all coming in, the application be approved. If any comments at all come in, it will come back to committee. Agreed?
Agreed.
Right. Okay, that will happen. That will happen then. So now we go straight then to the first application, which is in Staverton, and the application number is 0510. Over to you, officers.
Thank you, Chairman. The application actually relates to a range of barns which are in the open countryside, and those barns are substantially completed. There's actually access off day 42, which was via a long track, and the nearest property to the site is actually Oak Cottage, which is approximately 15 metres to the east of barn 4, and then the next nearest property is Whitmill Cottage, which is approximately 60 metres of barn 1, which is to the south. Thereafter, there are a number of four residential units which have come as a result of development of the old hospital isolation site, and they're approximately about 100 metres away. The application before members tonight proposes to use the barn as a wedding venue, and with a number of changes. They're mainly fenestrational changes to the internal courtyard, and a provision of a new car park, which is to the northwest of the site as well. Officers have concluded that the barns would have an acceptable impact on the visual amenity of the area, as these structures have been approved within a previous application. But rightly, concerns have been raised by the parish council and neighbours as to the impact of the activities which would result from the proposed use. However, the application is supported by a noise assessment, which has been subject to consultation with environmental health officers. Equally, and one of the neighbours has also employed their own noise consultant to consider the assessment, and following comments from both the environmental health officer and the comments of the neighbours noise consultant, further mitigation has now been proposed with further information submitted on the noise assessment. You'll also note that from the late representations which members would have received, that further comments have also come as a result of these new mitigation measures. I haven't put them on the presentation because a lot of it is text, but they were sent individually to all members, so all members should have a copy of those documents, which were sent by one of the neighbours. Officers consider that these additional mitigation measures have been subject to consultation, and environmental health officers are satisfied that with conditions in place, the noise would still be heard, but not to a level of statutory nuisance. And there are no other technical impediments to the application. And as such, officers recommend this application be approved, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chung. Right, we have 3 speakers. The first speaker is Mr. Simpson, who's against the application. Mr. Simpson, you have 3 minutes, sir. Do we have a Mr. Simpson here?
He is there, Chairman. I'm just trying.
Good evening, Councillor Osborne and members of the committee. I do apologise. I couldn't quite unmute. I presume you can hear me now. Can you confirm?
We can hear you now. You have 3 minutes. Sir.
Right, good evening. My family lives at Mortain Cottage, which together with Whitmill Hill Cottage and Oak Cottage is adjacent to Staverton Hill Farm. And I wish to make it clear I speak on behalf of all the aforementioned residents. We were aware of this installation at Staverton Hill Farm being known as a reclamation yard at the site prior to building our home. It operates now during normal working hours and has little impact on our location. The proposed wedding venue, however, is a completely different matter and an inappropriate use in such a quiet and tranquil place. If approved, this submission will build upon previous applicants' applications in 2009 and 2018, and it will result in a 113 berth car park, 5 buildings which will feature 3 dance floors, 2 bars, 2 kitchens and a restaurant. This scale is unnecessarily large and inconsistent with DDC policy guidelines for LSA designated areas. It is also inconsistent with the applications documents submitted that refer to event scenarios that will number 60 cars and a maximum of 125 guests. The application does not address how foul sewage arrangements will be modified to accommodate such numbers, nor mitigate possible excessive light pollution and stormwater damage from the car park. The application indicates that events will finish at 1 AM, resulting in guests and staff departing up to an hour later with inevitable noise from car doors, farewells and engine revving. No indicative event schedule is provided, and during the summer season, there could be loud music and noise every weekend. The predominant wind direction from the west means that the noise from discos and bands will carry a long distance, causing our families intolerable disturbance into the early hours. The noise surveys we commissioned were firstly WBM document 1, which I've asked to be circulated to the planning committee. And the findings were that the noise from the wedding venue will be extremely intrusive to neighbouring residents, even with measures taken to reduce noise from the function rooms. The subsequent Joint Nash report, commissioned in April of this year by the applicant, models data based on an Australian survey carried out in 2011. It only considers 60 car parking spaces and 25 guests at any one time in the open courtyard. On examination, WM found that this report was particularly inadequate regarding its findings on patron noise, music noise and beer chiller noise breaking out from buildings 1 and 4. This the committee can find on WM document 2, page 2.5. There are 6 well-established wedding venues within a 5-mile radius of this site, and it is unlikely that there will be a net economic gain from this development, merely a redistribution of existing business. Planning policies seek to guide new developments of this scale to towns such as Daventry, not rural locations. Policies seek to protect the living conditions of nearby residents and their environment. This proposal will create unacceptable noise at antisocial hours and light pollution to a dark country lane. The report from the officer to committee recognises that this is a finely balanced matter, I quote. I and other residents cannot accept the view that the impact on our peace and tranquility is outweighed by the benefits proposed. The site lies within the SLA designated area within the Staverton parish, where only small-scale development is supported. A proposal of this scale is wholly inappropriate, and we request that the planning permission is refused. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The second speaker is Mr. Golding, speaking on behalf of the Parish Council. Mr. Golding.
Thank you, Stephen. Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, you have me down as John. I wouldn't, from what you said earlier, I wouldn't want people to think that I was a planning officer. I am John Golding. I'm representing the Staverton Parish Council. Thank you. The current planning application for further development of Staverton Hill Farm is, by the applicant's own statement, the 10th planning application with consent since the site was purchased by them. All of these applications have involved additional buildings which have either been started but not completed, or not put to the use that they were originally intended for. Excuse me, I've lost my place now. This current application, by way of example, involves a change of use to building 4, which as of yet is incomplete, still under construction, following the previous unimplemented consent for relocation and change of use. You may choose to note from the above that the Staverton Parish Council remain very sceptical that this proposal, as it stands, is anything more than another step to whatever is the applicant's ultimate objection. In our view, that is the Staverton Parish Council, the size and visual impact of the proposed change of use and the associated further new development, which is outside the original application site, will adversely affect the amenity of the area. The extended site is on raised land overlooking the village, within the designated special landscape area, in close proximity to and adjacent to the A40 425 Daventry to Leamington Road, and even closer to the public footpath FD9, which bounds the site. This new development should be properly considered as a mass alongside the pending other planning consents that have not been completed or begun within the same vicinity and the same ownership. The approved residential development of the old isolation hospital at Whitmill Hill is only a few metres away from the application site on the other side of the hedge, and which is still partly under construction. Whilst the proposed planting will eventually give some screening against the inevitable increase in sound and light pollution of these residents, this will take many years to become established and will have no benefit in the short term. The referred to barriers will only add further to the detrimental impact of the visual amenity of the area. It is wrong to compare the hidden present use of private storage in the enclosed courtyard with the proposed use, which would involve a considerable increase in traffic movements at all times of the day and considerably, excuse me, I'm drying up, considerably more so when the venue is in use. This is evident from the apparent need for the 100, as I understand it, 113 car parking spaces. The increased activity, noise and general disturbance would be incompatible to the location and the adjacent residential properties. Given the clear concerns already expressed by your own environmental health officer in the DEC document recommended for approval, which I see is now your part of your agenda, and your own planning officer conclusion that the matter is finely balanced in the last pages of that document, there are far too many unknowns for the Staverton Parish Council to support this application, and we would respectfully ask the Planning Committee to refuse consent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Golding. And the third speaker is Mr. Clothier, who's for the application. You have 3 minutes, sir. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. You have
Excellent.
3 minutes from now, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I work for Joyance Nash Acoustic Consultants. We were employed by the applicant to provide an assessment of noise impact from the proposed wedding venue in response to concerns raised. We've undertaken baseline noise measurements to quantify the existing acoustic environment, and we've also undertaken noise predictions of operational noise from the venue, which consider all the different types of noise that may occur, such as patron noise, music noise, and vehicles arriving and leaving the premises. We note that having had site meetings with the EHO and subsequently provided more information in the form of these predictions, the EHO is satisfied that the proposal will not adversely impact upon residential amenity and recommends approval with conditions. However, there remains outstanding objections from nearest dwellings and the Parish Council. In our Joyance Nash report dated 7th of April, we set out predicted noise levels from at the nearest dwelling for a number of scenarios during typical use of a wedding venue. We calculated a worst case scenario from sound from music breakout from the function room and guests talking outside as being 45 decibels as a averaged energy level over time for an hour. We accept that measured background levels in the absence of the venue noise are lower than this, but we consider that the actual impact upon residents when comparing to planning practice guidance and noise is likely to be low. In the noise exposure hierarchy table, we consider that the highest level of cumulative impact falls into the lowest observed adverse effect level, as it has the potential to be noticeable, but the effect is unlikely to result in significant impacts upon residents or changes to the character of the area. On this, the advice is to mitigate and reduce to a minimum the impact, which can be done through a combination of engineering and management controls. Daventry Council's EHO's position is that they believe there will be a small impact, but it can be mitigated through engineering design, such as the use of an acoustic barrier and good venue management. We note that the noise consultants Buckby Mason, employed by the objectors, have had sight of our technical report and have made comments via late representations. On the subject of staff arriving and leaving, they state that staff leaving in the early hours may be noticeable. We do not believe that noise from activity will cause adverse impact at the dwellings, as our calculations show that through a partially open window, maximum noise levels from doors closing will be very low. Guests arriving and leaving, Buckby Mason do not see any potential issues from noise from this activity. Patrons outside, we've modelled and we use 2 different methodologies to predict this, and we think that they're rather robust. Management controls can control any excessive noise from patrons if that becomes an issue. We have greater confidence in controlling music noise breakout. There are a number of technical designs of speakers that can focus noise onto dance floors and reduce noise breakout from the building. So we feel that with the right speaker design set up in combination with management controls, we can make this venue acceptable in terms of protecting amenity to residents. So in summary, we feel the proposal can operate in a considerate and appropriate way and demonstrate this through a combination of measures which can be formalised by a condition prior to first operating. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we normally now go to the local member, which will be Councillor Frost. So Councillor Frost, over to you.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, so I live in Staverton and I obviously know the area well. I agree with the first 2 speakers this evening. It's speaking personally, if you like. I realise these things have to be judged strictly on planning policy and planning guidelines. It is, in my view, a shame that we can't apply common sense, because if we could draw reference to the fact that there are roughly 10 wedding venues within, I'd say, 2 or 3 miles. There are 2 already in the village, Skylarks and the De Vere, but I realise that's not relevant. I'm going to reserve the right to speak again later, but I want to object and disagree with the planning officer on grounds of the joint core strategy policy E7, because I don't think this fits the bill. Tourism, visitor and cultural industries. I don't think it complies with policy R2, and that it's a good use of rural buildings and things. And I think it conflicts with policy B9 because of to do with pollution control, particularly the sound of things that was talked about earlier. But I'll be interested to hear what everyone else's opinion is.
Thank you. Maria, have we had any speakers yet?
Not that I can see, Chairman.
No. Right, members, I need you to speak. Can you indicate whether you'd like to speak?
Councillor Smith has indicated.
Right, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a problem with this application, and certainly feel for the neighbours. The prevailing wind, as I think Mr. Simpson said, is without question going to carry noise, and this is the issue I think here is noise. You know, it's whatever it may be, music, cars, people. Yeah, I have a huge issue with that. It's in a special landscape area. I mean, this is a big development. Let's not pretend. I mean, if any councillors have looked, this is not a small, insignificant development. This is big,
I mean, the number of cars that the size of the car park, let's not be under any misconceptions as far as that's concerned. It's opposite the Devere. I mean, just a question for officers. Often with developments outside of the town, of Daventry town, I recall we've had one application recently that required a sequential test. And does this type of development require a sequential test to look at its impact upon businesses within Daventry town? It's just a question, because it's something I saw in recent papers and started to read up on it. But certainly, as I stand, I can't see the justification in this being approved. And I think Councillor Frost has pointed out a number of policies which it goes against. So certainly, as I stand, I'm very much against this application, but I'd like to hear more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria? Anybody else?
Yes, Councillor Ritchie next, Chairman.
Councillor Ritchie then.
Thank you, Chair. May I take the view that any decent wedding is going to be noisy, and generally there'll be people around that are disturbed by weddings. So I don't sort of feel the anger that I sense from some quarters over the idea that in what is, almost a rural site, it may be in Staverton, but it's well back from the village, there is going to be noise. But I do accept that for anybody who is living nearby, if that noise was to be excessive and was going to be experienced regularly, then that would be, that would be a real problem. I would be interested to hear from our officers. I'm looking at page 11, but there is the report from the Environmental Health Community Officer that talks about whether or not there's a case for restrictions on when the premises can operate. There's a suggestion that perhaps such restrictions would be better at licensing stage than planning. But I do recall that this committee has looked at similar applications before. I can remember one for the use of a farm between Bronson and Daventry for weddings and functions. And I remember another, and from memory, I think it wasn't terribly far from Staverton, in which the committee imposed restrictions on the number of days, whether it could operate on both days as of a weekend, things like that. And I'm therefore surprised that that is not that is not anywhere mentioned in the conditions. I'd be interested to know why the officers have decided not to make the hours and dates and time of operation a condition, and whether there is any reason why we should not propose a condition that would go with the application.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Could I go back to you then, Chung, and ask you to answer the question posed by Councillor Smith and also Councillor Ritchie?
Of course, Chairman. Thank you very much. First, on the sequential test, there's no really need to apply a sequential test in terms of the reuse of existing barns. These are not barns which are being proposed. These are barns which we have fundamentally accepted as being acceptable in terms of impacts on visual amenity, as they were approved within a previous application. So in terms of the visual impact, officers have considered that has been acceptable. In terms of whether or not that there's other facilities of a similar kind within the immediate area, that's not really a planning issue. And certainly not substantive enough to warrant a reason for refusal. Then obviously there's been a number of questions which have been queried by Councillor Ritchie about imposing a number of activities, etc. on this in terms of its use. Officers are not sought to impose those, as we don't feel that there is a necessity to do so. However, I said, I think the main crux of the situation here is whether or not members feel that the conditions which are being applied to the report sufficiently and satisfactorily, in their opinion, addresses the noise concerns.
Thank you, Joan. Maria, how many more?
Councillor Wesley and Councillor Irving Swift are the next on my list, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Wesley next then.
Yeah, Chair, I had actually put my hand down, but never mind. I will actually say something. These are really difficult. These are really difficult ones. I mean, fairly recently, it's probably a bit longer ago than I recall, but we did have some training on things like on noise pollution, and it's a very, I have to say, it's a very confusing and I think probably controversial issue as to what is acceptable and what isn't. And of course, when we are thinking about acceptability, you do genuinely have to think of both sides on this. And for me, with the current planning permission in place and the scale of it and everything else, this really does come down to amenity of the locals. And I fully understand anyone living in the vicinity of that would not want a wedding venue. But then again, where do wedding venues go? You know, we live in a relatively small country, and things happen all over the place, and we all go to venues, except we don't want them in our backyard. And so massive sympathy. But when it comes down to it, what we actually have, we have the principle is approved for the plans of these buildings, so that's not in there. So it's all about, for me, it's all about, is the mitigation possible, and is it so adverse as not to be acceptable? Well, the noise report that we actually have says that with mitigation, it is acceptable. We all know as well that we have remedy if it becomes unacceptable, i.e. reports of excessive noise into the late hours of night, early hours of the morning, and everyone has the recourse to that environmental health issue going forward, along with behaviours and everything else, to make this acceptable or unacceptable. I'm still torn on this, and I'm going to be listening to everyone else very carefully, but I do think sometimes you have to step away. We've heard things about sewage and etc. You do have to come down to the genuine planning reasons on this, and I'll be interested to hear as well from the planning officer if the reasons given are genuinely valid with reference to the fact that we've already approved plans for this site. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wesley. Councillor Irving Swift.
Thank you, Chairman. As our officer said, it's finely balanced, and it's all about mitigation. Do we accept the mitigation are enough or not? But also, could I ask another question? Because in that planning application, the parking is beyond the envelope. And for me, a new parking will be detrimental to the countryside. And if that becomes part of the new envelope of the planning application, it's quite 120 park places. It changed the dimension of the site as a planning application. So I think it's more to this application because it has an history of application after application after application. My view is I am not convinced that the mitigation, and I know it's a fine balance, the mitigation will be enough for the residents of nearby cottage to be to enjoy their quality of life. I don't think, I'm not sure it would be enough, but more importantly, what is the position about the car park? Because for me, we go beyond the envelope of the existing planning application? And could we find a reason on the car park to refuse the planning application? Thank you.
Thank you. John, do you want to answer that?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chairman. I think in terms of the car park, I think it is acknowledged within the report that it is beyond the original application site. But equally, the report advises that the officers don't feel that it's of such significant impact on the actual landscape that it would be sufficient to warrant a reason for refusal. I think you hit the nail on the head there earlier, Councillor Irving-Swift, when you said that the crux of the situation is how this development impacts on the neighbouring properties and whether or not members feel that the conditions are sufficient to address those impacts, in their opinion.
Thank you, John. Maria, anybody else?
Yes, Chairman, we've got Councillors Cribbin, Harris, Matton, James and Smith.
Could you say that again, Councillor Cribbin?
Cribbin, Harris, Matton, James and Smith.
Harris, James, Cribbin, Harris, James and Smith.
Yes.
No, Matton, there was a Matton in between, wasn't there?
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. Cribbin, Harris, Matton, James and Smith.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Right, Councillor Cribbin then.
Thank you, Chairman. So I've come to this application with, I suppose, with two hats on, being the housing and environmental health portfolio holder as well. I'm acutely aware of issues with noise with regard to properties and venues, etc. I do have some concerns myself about this particular application. As a planning committee member, I know there are mitigation conditions in the application and the conditions that the officers have put in, and the sound barrier that looks like a big screen between buildings has been put up, that the planning consultants that spoke tonight has said that they feel that's going to mitigate the problem. I still do have concerns that might not be sufficient. And I know that we have a situation where obviously planning and licensing, they cross over a little bit here. There is an option for when this goes to licensing committee for a license for whatever it wants to do, they can put conditions on there. But we also have an option to put conditions on timings and things like that, and number of events, etc. ourselves, potentially. I would quite like to see this committee consider quite strongly about whether or not we put further conditions on regarding timings. I know we've put timings on for things like we can't empty all the bins and bottles and things until at least 8 o'clock in the morning, and not after 8 p.m, that sort of thing. But I think perhaps we should be considering timings of when people are allowed to continue with their music, etc., and other conditions potentially that we might want to put on. I know Councillor Ritchie has suggested that, and I would echo what he's saying, that we should consider that. I'd like to see what the other members of the committee feel about that. I mean, I'm just worrying a little bit about we're potentially creating a situation that could be a noise issue for locals, that perhaps we can mitigate that a little bit more before we actually agree this application. I think generally I'm not totally against this application at all, but it's just the mitigation conditions and things that I'm still a little bit concerned about. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cribbin. Councillor Harris next, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So my comments build on the point made about mitigation. It fundamentally seems to me that it's a mitigation of noise issue. I wasn't entirely confident that the planning consultant felt that could be resolved through the use of the technological speaker setup that he described. The language was, we think, we feel, we believe we can make this work. That doesn't fill me with great confidence that would actually help to the mitigation of noise. It would seem also to me that if we rely on the after event, I'd take the point that we have got opportunity further down the line with licensing and perhaps adding conditions here. But that seems to me that we're just simply kicking the noise nuisance a little bit into the future, perhaps. And then it becomes an issue for the council to be involved probably fairly regularly to police it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Matton next. Councillor Matton.
Hello, yes, thank you. I was just unmuting, and I am very sympathetic to the neighbours, and I'm not convinced that the mitigation with regard to the noise levels is going to be satisfactory. As Councillor Harris just said, I was very interested in the comment about using particular types of speakers that only focus the sound on the dance floor. I didn't see that in the conditions. So who's actually going to manage what types of speakers to make sure that those are going to be used? So they could put huge, great speakers and there's no control over the noise levels that those speakers will generate. That's my comments. I'm very sympathetic to the residents that are living close to this application.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm minded to think of an application that was approved by us some months ago, not 100 miles away from this particular site, and I believe it was Long Furlong Farm. And this was an application for a wedding venue. And I myself voted and spoke against that application, but of course it was approved. And it was in a rural area, more of a rural area than this one, which is really in a semi-rural area. And I think on that basis, we have to have some consistency in the way we approach these. There's nothing in the report there that suggests that we could reject this on planning grounds. So I think that that is out of the question. What we have to do is to try and make the application more acceptable, and I think Councillor Ritchie put the finger on the button, that there has to be some measure of control over the music. And that's particularly so, especially in the light of today's modern music, where the amplification tends to concentrate on the bass line, incorrectly played as usual, but very monotonously so. And in a rural area, and I know this from my own experiences of other wedding venues, it can be very uninteresting, very annoying, and it does carry. So I'm not against the application, but I do think there ought to be some conditions, and we shouldn't pass the buck down the road to the licensing authority. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor James. Just to put you dead right, the difference between the two you were talking about was this application has a residence quite close to it, where the other application you were talking about didn't have.
No.
So that was the main difference between the two. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if you've noticed Councillor Frost wants to speak as well. He's waving his hand there. Yeah, I mean, this application is massively reliant on coming back and sorting the problem out afterwards. So the sound, massively reliant on the conditions, which doesn't fill me hugely with confidence, to be honest. But on this sound system in the building itself, other councils around the country insist on using things called entertainment noise controllers, which actually cut off the power to the amplification system should it go above a certain level. Firstly, and also they make it conditions I've seen around the country where noise monitoring systems need to be installed as well, which record all the sound. So it's actually registered, and then it can be easily accessed by environmental health or whatever. But it's a real shame that actually we're going to come to this, because I'm pretty confident, and I'd bet a pound on it, that we're going to be having issues with this site should this go through. And you know, poor people at Oak Cottage. I pity them. I just don't have a huge amount of confidence in this one. So my position remains the same. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Maria?
Yes, Chairman. Councillors Frost and Parker also wish to speak, and also Chung.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Frost, followed by who?
Councillor Parker, then Chung.
Parker. Okay. Sorry, your voice went a bit deep. Okay, Councillor Frost.
Thank you. And I'd like to just to deal with Councillor James's point about there being planning reasons or lack of them. I'd like to counter that by elaborating on the points I said earlier, by drawing attention to the three policies in the joint core strategy. Policy E7 requires that development is of a use, form and scale which does not harm the quality of the natural or built environment. I defy anybody to say that this application ticks that box. Policy R2 encourages proposals which sustain the rural economy by creating or safeguarding jobs and businesses will be supported where they are of an appropriate scale for their location, respect the environmental quality and character of the rural area, and protect the best and most versatile agricultural land. Well, clearly it doesn't do that. Policy B9 explains that development that would result in the deterioration of environmental quality, either individually or cumulatively, will not be permitted. Therefore, because this does, I would suggest it shouldn't be permitted. I mean, in terms of the protocol, we need to speak to the others and see what they think. But I'd be happy to recommend, if I can find a seconder, recommend that we refuse this application. But Chairman, I'll leave that with you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Irving Swift, are you seconding this refusal? If you are, you can speak now.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would like, as our officer said, it's all about, do we think the mitigation are enough? And I think it's also, and we may be putting that, it's a mitigation and also the quality of life of the other close by residents. And I think on balance, it's a very fine balance, but with what is in front of us, I don't think we can guarantee that this development will not have an impact, a huge impact on the other residents. So I will support Councillor Frost. And also, I don't know, but I'm still concerned about the parking and the fact that we will have had to extend the site of the planning application to put a parking lot on it, even if it doesn't have an impact on the visual impact. It changed the nature of a field to something that can be built on. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I support Councillor Frost.
Okay, so we've got a proposal and a seconder. I'm going to Councillor Parker, then I'm going, I think we've had a pretty good debate on it then. So I'm going to Councillor Parker, and then I'm going to go back to Chung.
Sorry, Chairman, through you. Councillor Smith has indicated since that he wishes to speak again.
Okay, well, I'll take those speakers, then I shall go to a vote. So I should go to Councillor Parker, then to Chung, and then to Councillor Smith, and then I would like to go to a vote. I think we've had enough debate on it now. I think we've gone pretty well through it. So over to you, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as everyone said now, it's mitigation of noise, which councillors have said, and we need to sort things out before there's a problem. We don't need to do it afterwards. And I really do like the idea that Councillor Smith said about those devices that can be installed which actually stops the music or turns it off at a certain level of decibels. And I think that's something we should look at, because that actually just stops it immediately. We don't have to go back and get EHO in to do any sound or anything after the event. We know ahead of the event what the decibels are. And I think that's something we should look at quite seriously. And hopefully it will help Councillor James with the bass noise music as well at the same time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Just on that particular subject, we had a noise limiter fitted on the community centre in Long Buckby, because it has houses all the way around it within 2 yards, 3 yards, the closest house. So what happened, you can bypass them and you can set the levels different. So what did people do when the noise wasn't loud enough, or when there was more people in the room? They were altered. And in the end, they were got rid of, and the actual time was limited instead, because they weren't proved to be as effective as they should be. But that was in our case. Anyway, Councillor Chung next, and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to draw members' attention to the conditions which are on the report, and there's been a lot of chat about noise limiters, use of particular acoustics which are directed at the dance floor. I think these are all methods and things which we could look at within Condition 10. Condition 10 does refer to a noise management plan being submitted to us prior to the use being operational. And furthermore, I think what I'm looking for is clarification as to the proposal in terms of proposal to refuse the application by Councillor Frost. I just wanted some clarification as to whether or not the proposal related to visual amenity, or whether it was purely in relation to residential amenity and the impact, the noise impact on residential amenity only.
Okay, we'll find out that now. Could you answer that question, Councillor Frost?
Yeah, I got those options again. I got the second bit. What are my choices again?
Residential amenity, or that was the second bit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it's whether or not your proposal included impact on visual amenity, because there was mention of policy R2, which looks at the reuse of existing buildings and the rural economy, or whether it is more narrow and relates to the impacts on residential amenity and noise only.
It's both. I fundamentally I question the logic of turning rather nice old farm buildings into modern the wedding venue. So I think it's on both counts. Yeah.
I think I would have to draw members' attention to that in terms of the impact on visual amenity. These buildings already exist. These buildings already have consent and are substantially complete. So if we're saying that particularly in the buildings have detrimental impact on the immediate area and special landscape area, then we have to have regard that, as an authority, we have already given consent for these buildings within a previous application.
Yeah.
You understand that, Councillor Frost?
I do. Yeah. This is rather quirk, isn't it? The planning system where you can sort of effectively creep up on a success like this, and then sort of try and sort of finish it off at the last minute. But I take your point, but I still think there's quite a lot of work to be done, and I think that work would affect the visual amenity or attractiveness of the site. If that's a huge problem for everybody, and I mean, if that's so contentious that you find it indefensible, then I guess reluctantly I'd drop it. But I still maintain that there's plenty of work still to be done, and that work is unattractive. I think I can defend that.
Okay, Chung.
If I could just maybe assist, I think most of the members' concerns don't arise from the physical buildings themselves, which are, like I said, are primarily already there. I think members' concerns are based purely on the actual use of the buildings rather than the buildings themselves.
Indeed, but I understand that in order for your in order to have a valid reason for refusing a planning application, you need to be specific in the policies or parts of the policies that you disagree with. And so that was why I quoted those. I agree with all the points that have been said, you know, and some. Of course, we've got enough experience or bad experience of things like long furlong and things to know that, as Councillor Smith said, you just know we're going to be tied up with years with complaints and enforcement issues and everything else. So I absolutely agree with all that. But I thought it would be helpful to quote the specific policies when proposing a refusal.
Thank you, Councillor. Sometimes, and I respectfully say this to you, sometimes it might be better to listen to the planning officer, who may have to defend this at appeal if it is refused, and would have a better chance doing it the way she's suggesting. But I suggest that respectfully. Okay.
In which case, I respectfully understand and concede the position. And,
okay, that's fine.
I'll go for. I'll drop the visual aspect.
Thank you very much. And also, I've got to say another thing. As far as these fantastic speakers that bounce music onto the floor. Now, I'm just a television engineer, but also I spent 5 years doing audio as well. That's just the theory of it. I can assure you, wherever sound bounces to, it bounces somewhere else. So if you reflect it to a floor, it goes somewhere else. It bounces somewhere else as well. So I just make that point.
Yeah,
right, there was one more speaker, Councillor Smith, I think it was.
Yeah, I'll be super brief. Clearly, the sound problems that this site is likely to create, and not just this from the sound systems, as the cars and the people. I won't say any more than that. I think we're pretty clear on our positions. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Now there's a hand.
More councillors have indicated they wish to speak. Councillor Irving Swift and Councillor Ritchie.
Yes, because I am the seconder. I think we should concentrate about the amenity and the sound, but also when you say about visually, I'm sorry, when you put 120 cars in a field, that has an impact. And I can tell you that in a planning application in another district, the reflection of the car and the caravan, it was for, on the sun, was so important that they said it distracted from everything. So I think the car park, which I know officers have dismissed, for me, it's part of the planning application, it's outside of the envelope, and it has maybe mileage, but you are, I understand what you say, and you say the officer said it's not, but for me, the creation of 120 car park places have a great impact on the amenity, on the visual impact on the field. Even if you put Lalandi, when you have the sun, it does shine because roof propose a glare, and for the next door habitant, it has a visual impact that is quite considerable. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I was going to take the vote, but there was one councillor shaking his hand like mad. So I'll take you, Councillor Ritchie, then we will go to the vote. Councillor Ritchie.
I hope that wasn't shaking it like mad. But
no,
nevertheless, Chair, I just wanted to say, respectfully, of course, that you've made some comments on the efficiency of the latest technology for dealing with sound. If we want to actually have an assessment of the technology, you have great skills and years of experience of life, but I'm not sure that you're the person that we would go for to get a technical assessment. I feel you have made comments too about what happens at Long Buckby and the deficiencies of the Long Buckby system. You, of course, as a member of the planning committee, have got a right to have a view and to have a vote. But I do feel that as chair, you should be making sure that the information that before us is as objective as it can be, and that the discussion is as reasoned and balanced as it can.
Thank you very much for your wonderful comments. Perhaps you'd make a better chairman, Councillor Ritchie. Anyway, the comments that were being made by councillors. They weren't in the information pack. That's why I made a comment. And unless I don't normally vote on applications unless I make a casting vote, or if they're in my own ward, or I feel very strongly on it. And I shan't be making a vote on this particular one unless I have to make a casting vote. Anyway, we have a proposal the application be refused for the given reasons. It's been seconded. All those in favour, we're going round for a count now. So you're either for it being refused, against it being refused, or abstain. So Marina, over to you.
Okay, councillors. Councillor Chandler.
Against.
Councillor Cribbin.
Against.
Councillor Dabbs.
For refusal.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Harris.
Or refusal.
Councillor Irving Swift.
For refusal.
Councillor James.
Can't hear you.
Councillor James.
Against refusal.
Councillor Longley.
For refusal.
Councillor Matton.
For refusal.
Councillor Parker.
For refusal.
Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Ritchie.
Sorry, against refusal. Yeah.
Councillor Robertson.
Against refusal.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Wesley.
Against.
Got the same 8, 6. Yeah, that's 8 in favour of refusal and 6 against.
Right, the application is refused for the given reasons. Right, the next application, if it takes this long, we'll be here till 2:15 tomorrow morning. The next application is in Brington and the application number is 0976. Over to you, Catherine. I can't hear a thing. Is Catherine muted?
Yeah, sorry, I do apologise. I was muted.
Okay.
So this is a site in Little Brington. It's Manor Farmhouse, which, as you can see by the site location plan, is on the corner with Blacksmith Lane and the main street. These red properties here and here and here, and you can see others, are all listed buildings. These here are Grade 2 listed buildings, one on the road frontage and one set back off on the road frontage. Now, if I go to the plot plan, so what the proposal is for a conversion and extension to the main building here to have an ancillary residential accommodation within the courtyard of Manor Farmhouse. Now, this is how it looks as existing, and these are the proposed floor plans for the proposed conversion. So you've got 2 bedrooms on the first floor and a lounge diner with a kitchen area and a utility room here as part of the extension. So these are the elevations. The application has been amended during the application process. Originally, the barn on this elevation had roof lights serving the bedrooms. Following comments from the neighbours, and they were actually relocated to the other roof slope facing into Manor Farmhouse itself. This roof light here is to serve a stairwell, which is above the 1.7 metres from the ground floor. In addition, there is a failure window. This serves the utility room. If you look at the floor layout plan, you can see that, or the floor plan, there is quite a close distance between the barn and the neighbour, in which there are proposed a slat area which will be fixed shut to prevent any overlooking. Going on to the pictures, these are the properties from pictures from the adjoining neighbour, Linden Cottage. So this is the neighbour, this is the barn in question here. These are taken from bedroom windows. Again, here's the barn in relationship to the neighbouring property. This picture is taken from the kitchen area. As you can see, there's the window which I mentioned about getting slats so it doesn't cause any overlooking. And this is again the relationship. So as you can see, the neighbouring property is on a slightly higher level than the actual application site. So it's a split level. This is the access drive to the listed buildings, which is set back from the main road. So the extension will come this way. And these are the pictures of the street scene facing down towards. The proposal includes the reuse of the existing access, which hasn't been used for a number of years. So there is an existing access there, it just hasn't been used, but it could be reused at any time. So these are the views from the actual entrance. These are the garages which are used by the current applicant. Now, as you noticed by the report, that there have been concerns raised by the local highway authority in regards to noise or in regards to the impact on the highway network. This proposal is for ancillary accommodation for a relative of the applicant to live in. It's not for a sold or let as a separate property. There is a condition, as you can see by in the papers before you, to prevent that's happening. Given that it's not off a main road, it's not really a thoroughfare, it's considered actually the impacts are acceptable. There is an existing entrance which could be reused at any time for the purposes of parking. The proposal includes that. In regards to the impact on sort of the character and appearance of the locality, officers consider that the impacts are acceptable, and the conservation officer has no objections. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. We have two speakers. First of all, Mr. Lake, who's against the application. Mr. Lake, you have 3 minutes from when you're not muted.
Okay, hopefully I'm not muted, which is a good start.
You're okay.
Yeah,
Carry
good.
on, sir.
Good. So yeah, good evening, Chair, committee members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Lake and I represent the consolidated objections against this planning application, which in summary are severe detriment to highway safety, loss of privacy and overdevelopment. I also hope to clarify some inaccuracies in the supporting statement to provide the best known evidence to enable the committee to make an informed decision. We have forwarded 3 documents to support our objections. So Main Street is a main through route to Daventry, Floor, the A5 and to access the M1 junction 16, and not only for local traffic as suggested. The busy pub on Main Street also brings much traffic and parking. This area of the village already suffers from street parking issues from earlier developments of farm buildings to multiple residential use in the 1990s, and the applicant converting a large barn with capacity for many cars to residential use and just 2 garages in 2004. The council are disregarding our and the parish council's objections, but more surprisingly, the two very negative highway safety reports from the local authority highway experts for both this and the preceding application. Both reports state that Manor Farm is sited on a dangerous blind staggered junction and there should be no parking in front of Manor Farm for visibility and pedestrian safety. Parking on St James's Place is too small without room for turning. The council considers this gravel area as parking for 4 cars when the application confirms to have 2. The new courtyard parking for 4 cars requires reversing blindly onto the main road to release other parked cars and has inadequate visibility displays, and only 1 garage is considered operational based on the highway reports. This parking will cause unacceptable risk to pedestrians and road users, and Part B of paragraph 108 of the framework states it should be ensured that safe and suitable access can be achieved for all users. Together with the benefit of the local highway reports, we would urge you to refuse this application in line with paragraph 109, where there is an unacceptable impact of highway safety. Document 2 shows loss of privacy and overlooking to neighbouring properties with 3 of the 4 planned elevations overlooking them. Privacy will be lost internally too, with both the west and east elevations looking directly into existing neighbour windows and or doors. The west elevation shuttered window is approximately 3 metres from the kitchen window of Linden Cottage. Land height differential to Linden Cottage is not shown on the west elevation, nor do the plans have reference to the many trees in our photographs. Whilst we urge the committee to refuse permission for these plans, we would request the following be made conditions of any approval: opaque, single pane, non-opening Velux windows with sensor controlled lighting and the removal of permitted development rights so windows cannot be introduced subsequently. Document 3 shows that the building Pottenbacken is a popular Airbnb and not ancillary and storage as suggested. This has been advertised for up to 6 people and has been used regularly, even across the last few months. As you will see, it adds to the difficult parking conditions and gives concern that this application will become the same. This would provide a relatively small site with at least 8 double bedrooms and 4 direct exits onto the main road, with all the issues already mentioned and demonstrated. We urge committee members to reflect on the proposals and the impact that this will have on the area, the increasing risk to highway safety and the disproportionate effect to direct neighbours through loss of privacy and overdevelopment. We know there is no common sense test hardwired into the planning process, but we are certain that there are more than enough illegitimate reasons to refuse permission. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we have Mr. Shadlow, who's the applicant. Again, if we can get him.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee for giving us the opportunity to comment, and to Catherine Daniels for her hard work over recent months in support of this application. Manor Farmhouse dates back to the 16th century as a working farm. As such, it is one of the oldest buildings in the Bringtons. In the same way that the next door Waydale Cottage has had an extension to accommodate poorly family members, the purpose of the proposed conversion was originally to accommodate both my aging parents. Sadly, my mother passed away in December, but we are hoping that if the proposal is accepted by the committee, then this will enable us to provide self-contained living accommodation for my father, who is suffering from early stage Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. 2 principal objections have been raised to the plans. Firstly, the potential impact on neighbours, and secondly, vehicular access and parking. To accommodate the concerns raised by the neighbours, we are pleased to have made a number of significant amendments to the overall design. These include the removal of windows to the south side, even though they were only Velux windows, relocation of the chimney stack, and shuttering on the window to the west. There now remains just 1 window to the south side, which is directly above the stairwell to help my father's mobility and safety with natural light over the stairs. We have further conceded that the window will be non-opening with frosted glass and at a height that nobody could possibly look through. I'm pleased to say that we have had letters of support from the neighbours who would be most impacted by this proposed development. In terms of vehicular access, the access point has been in existence and used by the farm for many, many generations. This is not new access. There are 2 garage parking spaces which were approved by the planning authorities about a dozen years ago and are used every night. Additionally, the plans provide for a further 4 more parking spaces, although it is highly unlikely they would ever be needed. There are additionally 2 other informal parking spaces. In the same manner as the garage is used, and indeed the drive used by the neighbours at Waydale Cottage and many other houses in the village, it is proposed that if the additional 4 spaces were ever to be used, vehicles will reverse into the slots and exit in a forward manner. The exit does not cross any pavement, which is on the other side of the road. Moreover, there is a 2-metre stretch of tarmac between the drive exit and the actual road. This affords drivers a very good view in both directions of any oncoming traffic in this, albeit very quiet, rural road. Lastly, the proposed development would of course provide a much needed financial boost for the economy at this very difficult time for all of us. Thank you, committee, for your time.
Thank you, sir. Right, there's no local member here, so councillors, queue up to speak, please. Do we have any speakers yet, Maria?
Councillor James and Councillor Evans-Swift, Chairman.
Who was the first one again?
Councillor James.
Councillor James. Councillor James, you're on, followed by Irving Swift. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This seems a fairly straightforward application from my point of view. This is one residence where someone is proposing to have an annex. Now, how many cars that person has in that house is entirely a matter for the owner of the house. He might have 4 or 5 cars himself. Nobody's going to complain because that's his choice and those existing access is there. So I think that really is a little bit of an irrelevance in this case. It is a revised application. Some of the problems that were initially envisaged have been overcome. So I cannot see that there's any real reason for objecting to this application at all. And I'll be quite happy to put my name on proposing that it's approved. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor James. Before I go to the second speaker, do we have a seconder? I can see a hand for seconder. Councillor Robertson. Would you like to speak now? Because you can do.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was wondering, Little Brington is a very nice little village, very quiet. I was wondering whether we're talking about Little Brington or whether we're talking about Marble Arch. There's no traffic issue here. I don't feel it's worth discussing. I think I like the development, and I think that's the reason I like to second it.
Thank you. Right, now back to the speakers list. Councillor Irving Swift.
Yes, it was just I wanted to agree with officer report, so that's all.
Okay, thank you. Maria, any more speakers?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Ritchie and Councillor Harris.
Councillor Ritchie, you're speaking next, followed by Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I do tend to agree with Councillor Robertson that, you know, those of us who live around villages, indeed those who live in many parts of towns as well, to argue that there is a serious traffic problem here, or to ignore the fact that we have got, we have got villages, we have got old properties in which people are probably going to be reversing out of several times a day, and that is life. Of course, if we were building something anew, we would think and insist that the full local authority, local highway requirements are met, but we're not in that position. I would have been happy to second this, but I would like to think that the points that were raised by Mr. Lake as conditions concerning the type of glass that is used in the windows and so on, that I would have liked to have seen that actually incorporated into the conditions that we, if we approve this. I can't remember precisely what it was that Mr. Lake proposed, but if the officers have a note of it and could formulate a condition, I would be happy to propose that as an amendment.
Okay, well, we'll go back to the planning officer, Catherine. You heard Mr. Lake's speech. Is anything that he wants as conditions in there or not? Or could they be added if the committee wanted them to be?
If you go to condition number 5, that pretty much removes permitted development rights away from the property. So anything that they would need to do. In regards to the opaque window or the Velux window on the south side, there's actually on the drawings it actually shows that that's going to be opaque. And that's condition number 2, so the development must be carried out in accordance with the approved plans. Now, potentially if members want that to be retained in perpetuity, similar to the external shutter, then that's something potentially we could do. Thank you, Chairman.
And how would you do that? By taking away development rights?
No, it's when sort of, so the obscure window shown in drawing, whatever it is, shall be retained and fixed shut in perpetuity. But like for like replacement won't need planning permission.
Okay. I'll go back to the proposer. Are you happy to add that as a condition? Where's the proposer gone?
Yes, quite happy to add that as a condition.
Right, thank you. The seconder, are you happy to agree with that?
I am, Chair, but I didn't actually hear any change. I thought that Catherine just said that it was all covered.
Okay, well, they are now because you've both agreed to it. Right, Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just one observation regarding the, there has been an expression of concern by the local highway authority, which does seem to have entirely been dismissed. And it's just a query as to why we are not taking any account of issue raised by the local highway authority.
I say it with tongue between cheek as their county councillor. Perhaps they our officers don't consider the situation the same as the highway authority does. Let's put it like that. That's very simply put. Anybody else wish to speak, Maria, or not?
No one else has indicated, Chairman.
Okay, we have a proposal the application be approved subject to the conditions that were added, which has been seconded. Over to you, Marina, for who's in favour of the application being approved and who's against it.
Councillor Chandler.
For.
Councillor Cribbin.
For.
Councillor Dabbs.
For.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Harris.
Abstain.
Councillor Irving Swift.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Longley.
For approval.
Councillor Matton. Councillor Matton. Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Robertson.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Wesley.
For.
That's carried, Chairman, with 13 voting in favour and 1 abstention.
Thank you. The application is approved. The next application is is in Brixworth, and the number is 0054. Over to you, officers.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just sharing my screen again. So members will recall this site. I believe it's been to committee previously and it was refused. As you can see, it's in the conservation area on the corner with Harbour Road and Northampton Road. It was for the demolition of the existing pub and redevelopment into an A1 shop. As you can see by the papers, it's most likely to be the relocation for the co-op along the Spratton Road. However, sort of the previous application was refused, and then the applicants went to appeal, in which it was dismissed at appeal for a number of, that the loss of the public house and the redevelopment would harm the character and appearance of the designated heritage assets. That includes the conservation area and also the nearby listed buildings. So what we've got before members tonight is a revised scheme for the development, which officers consider that the overall impact, the overall design is an improvement, vast improvement to the previous scheme, and it actually overcomes the concerns about the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. You note that there is a strong objection by the county council in regards to the impact on the highway authority. And however, that was also a reason for refusal last time. However, the planning inspector didn't think that the development would result in an impact on the highway nearby and would not cause a safety issue. Therefore, the appeal was not dismissed on the basis of highway safety. Another reason for refusal on the previous one was the loss of the pub, and also the creation of this wasn't in accordance with policy. However, the inspector did not dismiss that either on appeal. So what's really before members tonight is whether members actually consider whether this satisfies the appeal inspector's decision, and whether the revised scheme before you is an improvement and it will be beneficial to the character and appearance of the locality, and it will not harm that area, including designated heritage assets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. We have 3 speakers. The first one is Mr. Osier, who's against the application. Mr. Osier?
Good evening. Can you hear me, Chair?
We can hear you. You have 3 minutes from now, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Nigel Osier and I'm acting for residents in Brixworth. I'm also a chartered town planner. I'm a resident of Brixworth and a member of the Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group. We strongly object to the application. Respectfully, given the strength of the objections and the relevant planning policy, I'm surprised to read the officer's recommendation. In my view, the use proposed is in principle totally unacceptable at this location. No amount of change to design can overcome the severe problems. I deal with 3 things: highways, amenity and character. While not repeating all the comments made by the Highway Authority, it seems fundamental to me, again, as an in principle consideration, that the site has inadequate parking with only about 1/3 of what it should have for a shop of this size. The assumption that cars will park on the street is not right and not supported by the HA. The development presents safety concerns to both motorists and pedestrians, and that doesn't include a fair criticism of the layout of the parking as well. Add to this, proposed deliveries will take place on the roadside, or in fact in the road, and a number of times a day, then more problems than safety. This too is a bus route right outside the shop. I am surprised, given the council's previous views on refusing a Chinese restaurant on the same corner due to amenity and parking, the officer now considers a supermarket operating all day is appropriate. The second concern is amenity. The shop hours are 7 till 10 with continued activity until 11 p.m. And we know deliveries will take place earlier than the 6 o'clock and throughout the day. With the constant activity, a difficult traffic situation, I believe it's an unacceptable loss of amenity to residents, for residents in that area and the surrounding properties. The inspector in the appeal in 2019 did not actually review amenity because he said he'd already decided on his reason to dismiss the appeal. So therefore you can look at amenity. Again, previously the council refused a Chinese restaurant on this end due to the loss of amenity. I can't understand why you believe a supermarket does not cause more harm. In terms of character, the loss of the existing building will change the character of the conservation area, and I agree with the previous inspector that the existing building holds an important place and significance. The development harms the appearance and setting of the surrounded listed buildings. I consider that any public benefit from a new supermarket is not enough because of its harm to outweigh the need to preserve the character of this area. There's a clear harm to conservation and the value of the area. I therefore consider the application contrary to core strategy BN5 and S10 and local plan part 2 policies ENV7, AB and parts of D and ENV10. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Second speaker is Mr. Mitchell, speaking for the Parish Council.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time on this. I'm speaking on behalf of the Brixworth Parish Council. We have strong objections in respect to this application for the demolition of the public house and construction of an A1 food retail area. According to the application form, it's in the order of 795 square metres. A prime objection is in respect to highways and parking. And whilst the application has partly addressed some of the issues, Brixworth Parish Council do not agree with the assertions and comments within their statement, as it fails to provide sufficient and overriding evidence to suggest the development of this site, whilst not being able to provide suitable on-site parking for customers and delivery vehicles, can justify a departure from the Northampton County Council parking guidelines. The guidelines' key message here, as the aims of the parking standards document, are to support the provision of sufficient usable parking within development without compromising highway safety while supporting good design. The standards for an A1 food retail roughly equate to one vehicle space per 20 square metres. Now, on the application details of 795, then under normal circumstances, the development should be accommodating 40 car parking spaces with additional facilities for cycle, motorcycle and disabled parking. And on disabled parking, there should be at least 3 or 4. Lorry parking is referenced under Chapter 10 of the NCC Guide. The application site outlines only 14 spaces, including 1 disabled, which can be provided within the curtilage of the site. And no specific reference has been made to manager or staff parking. The application details are reliant and argue that there's enough space off-site facilities along Northampton Road to accommodate the remaining spaces, or within 200 metres, a view that's been supported by the Plan Inspector under appeal. The application details actually suggest that from a staffing point of view, there will be 12 full-time staff and 12 part-time staff. And you have to equate to yourself, where will they park? Will they park within the car park or park along Northampton Road? The application also refers to exceptional circumstances that may justify a lower provision. The application fails to provide sufficient evidence to justify such exceptional circumstances. Quite the reverse. The basic level of parking provision and the geometry of the road and its environment, as those photographs suggest, with off-site parking, is a serious and very dangerous highway situation. Put quite simply, the application is reliant upon parking and servicing outside the curtilage, as the site is clearly too small. The application also does not provide the minimum number of parking spaces for disabled people, and therefore there's a risk of it discriminating against these users. It fails to take into consideration that the adjoining properties, which are 5 commercial properties along Northampton Road, each with their own staff and customer parking arrangements, and the report therefore makes no reference of how that's going to be accommodated. The photographs illustrate below simply what's on your screen at this moment in time, what could be very typical by way of off-street parking as well as the bus route itself. Customers will clearly wish to park within easy reach of the shop, particularly if they're carrying heavy shopping bags. This is just not possible when you factor in the already limited parking along Northampton Road and that of the adjoining units. The application details suggest that delivery vehicles can and will park on the highway in a designated area of 10 metres by 3 metres or so. Take into consideration a tail lift, then the area required will be at least 13 metres long. Brixworth Parish Council would question if any planning condition is either practicable or enforceable and would fail to protect other highway and pedestrian users in and around the site. To conclude this, we're concerned that the parking standards provide good guidance insofar as, where appropriate, developers will be required to demonstrate there is adequate provision of space within the site for parking, manoeuvring, loading and unloading to fulfill the operational requirements of the proposed development. In principle, the Brixworth Parish Council have no objection to a change of use from a public house to an A1 food retail, providing that all relevant functional requirements are incorporated within the design and within the curtilage of the site. It is an unsafe assumption to suggest that there is adequate and or alternative off-street parking to take up this shortfall. The proposed unit would be twice as large as the current one, and this, in respect of Brixworth Parish Council, disagrees with the inspector's findings. Its retail offer would be attractive to the surrounding villages, thus avoiding trips to Northampton, Kingsthorpe, which is to the south, and Market Harbour to the north, and is most likely to draw upon a wider customer base. With a larger choice within the retail unit, the dwell time is likely to be longer than currently experienced within the existing shop at Spratton Road. Our view is therefore that with inadequate facilities within the site, customer staff parking, loading, offloading and refuse collection outside the curtilage of the site presents an unacceptable highway risk and a danger to life of pedestrians and children, and as such, Brixworth Parish Council would request that the application be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. The third speaker is Mr. Elliger, who's the agent. Mr. Elliger.
Thank you, sir. I think I'm unmuted now, am I?
Yeah, you're okay now. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Good. Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, we actually didn't have a committee on the last occasion in 2018 for this application, but I do now welcome the opportunity to present to you. I think your officers have correctly set out the inspector's conclusions in the appeal from last November, and he said there would be no harm to highway safety, despite examining county highways and the local residents in the parish council's case in forensic detail. He said there was no harm to the loss of the pub, its replacement with a shop, no harm to the village centre and the Brixworth neighbourhood plan, and he did also say there would be no harm to neighbours from noise, lighting or deliveries. These conclusions are now written in stone. No one has challenged his conclusions in the courts, which is the right and only place to do so. His conclusions can't now be challenged at a planning committee meeting, and we can have another appeal, but it'll still be bound by the previous one. Nor has there been any change in circumstances. We all knew there was going to be more housing in the village. The inspector saw traffic conditions before and after his public site visit. He was there long after everybody else had left. And 30 residents creating a scene on a Sunday afternoon doesn't change anything. Nothing has changed since the appeal and the inspector's conclusions, which brings us to the current application. The only issue is whether the building now proposed would overcome the, albeit less than substantial, harm caused by the loss of the existing building. Your officers clearly believe it would. We've employed a new design team, and as the report says, the new building would be a significant improvement. It responds more positively to its context, sympathetic to surrounding form, and makes a positive contribution to the conservation area. That's their words. The only caveat, quite rightly, is in architectural detailing, which they say needs to be carefully executed. It will be. That's the reasons for the conditions, and we're quite happy with all of those. So just a couple of points to clarify. There is no common brick on the front, as the parish council say in their comments. It will be a quality facing brick. And I note there's concern over a delivery management plan, but actually this gives the council more control than, say, simply restricting delivery hours. It's a very common solution. But what is important at the moment is the investment, jobs and services the new co-op will bring at a time when the country needs it most. What it doesn't need is a drain on the public purse from pursuing an unreasonable appeal against officers' advice. I'd urge you to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Right, local members are Councillor Parker and Councillor Harris. Councillor Parker, do you wish to? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to go through a few points. I understand how the planning officer has arrived at his decision, but I cannot agree for the following reasons. If we look at page 43, it says here, the appeal inspector, he considered that the demolition would cause less than substantial harm to the character of the conservation area and would thereby be in conflict with BN5. This would continue to apply to the consideration of this application. This is also reinforced in the inspector's notes on points 8 and 9. Notwithstanding this, its distinctive design and its command of the corner, despite its different language, adds to the architectural character of the CA. It adds to the historic significance of the CA as a marker of the social changes to drinking and public house design in the early century 20, particularly so given its rural location and the size of the village. For these reasons, and despite its departure from its rural village vernacular context, the building has sufficient historical architectural significance to justify that attribution. Its demolition would harm the character of the CA, placing it in conflict with policy BM5 of the West Northampton Joint Core Strategy and policies 8 and 9 of the Brixworth Neighbourhood Development Plan, which require development to preserve or enhance the significance of the character of a conservation area. The new design, which is on page 44, point 2 of mine, this is from the planning policy. The design of the amended proposal is considered to be an improvement on the previous design in that it responds more positively to its context, but it needs to be exemplary in order to be acceptable. If we then look at the Conservation Officer's notes also on page 44, it says here, the Appeals Inspector's report, 8th of November 2019, agreed with the Council's position and concluded that the red line adds to the architectural and historic character of the conservation area. Its demolition would harm the character of the conservation area. It is therefore curious as to why the heritage assessment accompanying the current application is still insisting that the building is of no heritage interest and that its removal would result in negligible harm. This reference is also mentioned on page 52 under main applications. It says, the assessment of the value of the existing building remains at variance to the local planning authority's assessment, as supported by the appeal inspector. Furthermore, officers do not agree that it is acceptable to replace an incongruous building with a more neutral one, as this is locally prominent and important site within the Brixworth conservation area, and as such deserves a building of superior concept and execution, not just a neutral one. On page 44 and 45, the Conservation Officer notes on pre-application advice regarding the eastern boundary wall and the detailing of the new area to the front north of the building will be crucial. What it says in the last paragraph by the Conservation Officer, I haven't seen any attempt to deal with this in either the design and access statement or the heritage assessment. The last paragraph, sorry, this, to conclude on redevelopment, the inspector states on point 17, turn it up, I conclude that the proposed development would fail to preserve the character and appearance of the CA and the setting and surrounding listed buildings. It would have failed to satisfy the requirements of the Act, paragraph 192 of the framework, and it would conflict with the development plan policies described above. So they're all the policies. With reference to the parking, much has been said, and correctly so. Highways continue to object to this proposal. And on page 41 at the bottom, the last paragraph, the local highway authority, it says objects, but in their submission it says firmly, so that's just been missed out. So the local highway authority firmly object to this planning application on both highway safety grounds and the likelihood of obstruction taking place on both the live carriageway and publicly maintained highway, land and pedestrian footpaths. The number of parking spaces, as mentioned, is only 37% of the required NCC standard, 13 spaces compared to 35, with only one mobility dimensioned space. This proposal is for a supermarket, as the floor, because it's doubling the size of the existing one, now dictates Sunday opening of 10 till 4. The opening hours continue to be 7 till 11 for this particular premises. That's the same as some supermarkets, and actually is less, sorry, is more than some supermarkets. That's going to be 6 days a week in a conservation area, a residential area. This hardly enhances the tranquility of the conservation area and shows a lack of thought to residents. To conclude, you can understand officers' comments on page 38 when they say, the parish council and many local residents, and to an extent officers, still have reservations over the overall suitability of the site for the proposed development, and particularly regarding the traffic and parking aspects. This is then also mentioned on page 60 in the conclusion of the officers, where it says, officers still have concerns over some aspects of this proposal, particularly the traffic, access, parking and deliveries associated with this scheme, as well as the overall suitability of this site for a new co-op for Brixworth. I propose, therefore, to go against officers' advice on this, Chair. And that is my proposal.
But what are your reasons?
My reasons would be against ENV7, ENV10, BN5, NPPF 192, and neighbourhood plans policies 8 and 9.
Right, do you have a second?
I second.
Hold on. I'll give the local member a chance to first, just in case he does want the second. Local member, Councillor
I am your
Harris.
county councillor.
Yeah.
Are you asking me, Chair?
Yes. Did you want to second it, Councillor Harris?
I will second. I do have some words I would like to say as well. They are different, but in support of Councillor Parker's.
Thank you. Councillor Irving Swift, I'm not trying to be horrible to you. I think I am aware you're the county councillor, but I think it would be fair with such an important application to let the other district councillor have the chance to second. Is there anything more you wish to say, Councillor Harris?
Yes, Chair. Oh, sorry.
I'll come back to you in a second. Councillor Harris, do you wish to say any more?
Yes, Chair, just a few points. And again, I'll avoid repeating too much. This is a divisive issue in the village, it's fair to say. There are some people that are actually very pro a new facility. And I think you'll find that the vast majority of the people in the village would welcome a facility. The simple point is this is just not the suitable location for such a facility. People also talk in the village about the great work done by the staff during the lockdown period. I would echo that completely. That is not an issue in regard to planning. That still continues. So I just wanted to make that point that we value that and there's no reflection on the work that the people have done. I do want to comment on a couple of points in the report from the officer, because I think they're a little misleading is probably too strong a word, but if you're not familiar with Brixworth, they could lead you to interpret differently. So the Red Lion is referred to as a hotel. It has 3 letting rooms, as people may know. It's not a hotel, it's an inn. It's a local drinking pub. People have always walked to the establishment, maybe with 1 or 2 cars. The report refers to the employment issue, creating employment. The store is relocating. It will relocate from Spratton Road. It may be slightly larger, but it will be fairly minimal in terms of employment impact. And I would imagine that any work or building work will be brought in. I can't imagine that will be locally awarded. It also talks in the report about revitalising this part of the old village. This part of the old village has 2 listed coaching inns, a Chinese takeaway, a barbershop, a florist and a hairdresser's. I don't think that part of the village needs any more revitalising. The report also suggests it's on the periphery of the conservation area. If I'm not mistaken, it's either in a conservation area or not. So it's very clearly in the conservation area. Comparisons are drawn in the report also to Tritomas in Caerphilly as an example store in terms of size and parking. It doesn't mention that in that location there appears to be a spa, a general store, a Tesco Express and a spa within a garage as well. So there's much more choice available in that particular area. The catchment area for this particular store is significant. I estimate that it's probably around something like 4,000 to 5,000 households if you take in the villages locally that will come and use the facility, and a population probably of around 10,000 roughly. Obviously they can only be estimated. So I completely echo the point about the conservation area. Definition of conservation area, we are clear, an area of notable environmental or historical interest or importance which is protected by law against undesirable changes. I would also like to just mention, councillors might remember that we agreed to vote through Article 4 directions in December for Brixworth, the conservation area. They aren't in effect currently, they will come into effect in November, but that provides, in fact, further restrictions on any permitted development within the conservation area. There's 108 properties listed, not included listed buildings themselves. And at least 9 of these properties are either opposite or in close proximity to the Red Lion. So Article 4 directions will mean that they can't even get painting done or paint their fences without seeking approval. So it does seem rather obscure to me again that we think it's okay to recommend a supermarket within a conservation area. Secondly, you've heard comments about the highways issues, and note that it says firmly object. It is not a great location at all from a safety point of view. And also, you also heard the point mentioned about the precedent set in 2005 in regard to extending the Chinese restaurant, that would have a major impact, and it was rejected on appeal. So in summary, from my point of view, we do need a facility in Brixworth, but this is not it. We need to be much more creative about that location. We would all value it, we would all welcome it, but that does not mean we should opportunely shoehorn in a development in an inappropriate location. So in my view, the harm outweighs any benefits of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Irving Swift.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman, because I knew you didn't want to be nasty to me. You have never been. Just one thing, as a county councillor, I can say very clearly and very openly that I can take a broader view and I will echo all what the two councillors before me have said. Also, in the new proposal, the way they will load and unload are on the main street, if I understand correctly. So that will add another strand on the highway. And now with Brixworth, and I think the person who represents the co-op is absolutely right. We are going to have a new era after COVID-19, but it's an opportunity for some, but it's also an opportunity for community to be strengthened. And now you have heard from the two local councillors how they want a better shopping. Everybody agrees that Brixworth needs something new and something a bit bigger. But the community has been strengthened with COVID-19. They like what they have. They help the co-op and they are very thankful for the co-op. But I do not understand why the co-op is not listening to the people they have helped and who help them. I think the office have done a very good work because with the two appeal and they have addressed all the issue. But I will go with Councillor Parker and I will add my voice to both Councillor Parker and Councillor Harris to vote against that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Irving-Swift. Maria.
Hello, Chairman. There are quite a lot of speakers. If the officer would like to come back initially, and then Councillor Robinson, I've got next, followed by Councillor James.
Robinson, James, but officer first. Okay, Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to come back to Councillor Parker's comments about the highway safety issues, because as I can get to know from his proposal, it's more of the impact on the character and the conservation area and the overall design and the loss, and pretty much the loss of that public house is not outweighed by the new scheme, which is before members tonight. Is that correct, Councillor Parker?
Give a yes or no.
Yes, you are correct.
Thank you, Kevin. I mean, Councillor Parker.
No, because I know that there's some comments about highway safety, which as members, you sort of especially seeing the officer's report on paragraph 61, that there's talk about sort of that there's the inspector decided, actually sorry, it's on page 60 on the second part of conclusions, where the hands of the local authority are largely tied because of the previous appeal decision. So if you decide to go against a previous appeal decision, comments in the sense of highway safety, then we potentially run the risks of costs against the council. In regards to sort of, I know there's comments about deliveries and things, again, those were covered by the previous inspector's decision, which as officers and the local planning authority, we will have to have regard to that. And if we go against that, then potentially, yes, again, we'll be open to costs. So as concerns they may be, which we do take note of, having regard to the previous appeal decision, we can't really recommend this application for refusal based on highway safety. But again, in the sense of the subject concerns about the loss of the public house and the replacement with what's before members tonight, that's subjective, and if members don't feel that the benefits of this scheme outweigh that harm, then members are entitled to take that view. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. In the light of that advice, Kevin, do you want to modify your proposal?
I don't think I mentioned highway parking provision, did I? Oh, did I encompass that in one of the policies?
Through you, Chairman, no, it's all the policies to me regarded the impact on the character of the locality, the design, heritage assets, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Not on any matters regarding highway safety, including sort of parking provision, which also would like to remind members that actually the county standards for parking is a county standard. We have not adopted those standards. Thank you,
That's
Chair.
right. We have our own.
So I think my proposal still stands, Chair.
And you're still happy to second that, seconder?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, Catherine. Right, Councillor. Oh, wait a minute. Who was next? Oh, yes. I've got Councillor James, but I've got somebody before Councillor James. Who was that?
Councillor Robertson.
Oh, yes, yeah, Robertson. Yes, I do beg your pardon, Councillor Robertson. I wrote it down shortly and I thought, who the hell is Robin? But it's Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. This is a matter that worries me. It's quite close to my heart as well because I have an interest in a local pub. But that aside, I'm reliably informed that after the pubs reopen, which they're of course all closed at the moment, every one of them, 14,000 of them will never reopen. Now, that's a fact of life, I think, and this could well be one of them. So I've no real reason to object to this development on the grounds that we'll lose a pub, that we're going to lose this pub one way or the other. Now, so that leaves us with what? We're going to turn down, are we, a development, and we may be turning down the development of co-op. Why? Because it's not a really suitable site. I actually agree. It's not very suitable for a co-op, in my opinion, but it's going to be used for something. And I think the likelihood is that this committee should really think about, I know it's not before them at the moment, but what's going to happen after permission is given for pubs to reopen. Now, that said, I do say that the parking isn't adequate. Those pictures, which to my mind are clearly contrived, because my experience of it is never that bad, but very rarely that bad. There isn't adequate parking there. I do agree. There could be more, and I think the thing could be designed better. There's quite a lot of land behind it. What's the idea of that? A garden for the co-op? I'm not too sure. Anyway, that's my view, and so I'll wait what other people have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little bit concerned that we shall lay ourselves open to the possibility of cost if we raise as a principal objection highway safety. There is a highway safety issue here, and it's sufficient for me to have deep concerns about this application. That particular bend there has always been a bend, if you went back half a century, where one had to be very, very careful, particularly during winter months, going round there. Of course, you know, people would have used that pub by car, I know that, as indeed they would have done the other pub. But most people would have probably walked to those two pubs. They're what we used to call spit and sawdust pubs in the old days. But nevertheless, they are an interesting part of the vernacular architecture, if you like. So there is, apart from the highway concerns, there is also this about, does the replacement building add anything to the conservation area? Does the demolition of the existing building detract from it? And I say that it does detract from it, removing that building. And I don't consider the design of the new supermarket sufficient to justify doing that. So I'm afraid I'm in agreement with Councillor Parker and Councillor Harris that I think we should actually reject this application and go against officers' advice on the full the whole grounds.
Thank you, Councillor James. Maria?
Next speakers are Councillors Longley and Councillor Dabbs.
Councillor Longley, you're on now, followed
Yeah,
by Councillor Dabbs.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, as you probably well aware, I've got business interests in Brixworth, so I've been following this very closely. And what I found very interesting is that there's been strong emotions both ways, some for, some against, and it's been pretty well balanced as far as I can see. I did enjoy Councillor Harris's assessment. I thought that was very good. And I've come back to Councillor James. He didn't like the new design. Well, that's a matter of opinion, Councillor James. My personal view, it's an ugly building, and I would like to see the back of it personally. I drive past it pretty much every day, and I think it's a poor quality all round. It's never going to survive economically. Sooner or later, we will do something there. So the question remains: is it the right place for a supermarket? There are better ideas, I'm sure, but the problem we have in Brixworth, as anybody who knows Brixworth well, is the block of shops that we have. If you think you've got a parking problem where the pub is, there's a really big parking problem where the shops currently are. You can never park there, down the side roads. Something has to be done sooner or later to improve that shopping facility, bearing in mind the recent expansion of the village that we have there. So the amenity hasn't been dealt with. This is a possibility, not the best, grant you that, but it's a possibility. My personal view is I'm going to support the officers on this, because I think that it's the best option available, and until a better site could be found, which is unlikely within the village confines, as far as I can see, we're likely, if we do anything of significance, is to go outside the village confines. You then got cars going to it. If only we had another site like the doctor's surgery, then I'd say fine, we'd go there instead of here. But I just don't see that on the horizon. So I on this occasion, will be supporting the officers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Longley. Councillor Dabbs.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I'll go along with pretty much what Councillors Parker, Harris and James have proposed, and I think I would tend towards turning this recommendation down. When I was reading this, I was looking at all the notes on the appeal and the concerns on the parking, and they seem to have been just waved away. So I would see that as a pretty big risk if we do load this with the parking concerns and traffic concerns. But I do question that why we have to ignore the words of in NCC Highway of is a danger to highway safety and serious danger to pedestrians. Seems to be, if you can just wash that way with a flick of the wrist, that is unbelievable. But I know that the officer was mentioning that these are county council applied guidelines that we don't consider or that we haven't adopted. So I just wonder, what would our rules be? Do we have rules for the recommendation of parking, and therefore does it comply? I personally think that we forever are ignoring parking. And we're forever after the event looking at massive parking problems. Some we've inherited on old estates when there wasn't car parks, but some we've inherited on modern estates where we should have known better. So can I just ask for the officer to clarify the point on what our policy is on parking? Is 13 parking places considered to be a good number, and having delivery lorries unload and load on the roadway round a bend where, yes, it doesn't look massively busy when we look at the Google view, but that's only one point in time. And I do think that all the objectors maybe they've dressed it up a little bit too far. But I think if you've got a lorry parked at the side of the road, you are causing issues. It is on a bus route. It can't help with the safety. So those are my points. I shall be voting against this, but perhaps the officers could comment on what our policies may or may not be.
Thank you, Councillor Dabbs. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, what I would say is the previous application was actually refused on highway safety grounds. The parking is pretty much the same as to what's before you tonight, members. Therefore, then it went to appeal, in which the appeal inspector considered that the loading bay on the highway network was deemed to be acceptable and would not result in a highway danger issue. Therefore, we've got to take into account that appeal inspector's decision, even though we've refused a very similar application on that basis. So refusing something again on highway safety grounds would be against what a planning inspector has already said. And again, if we did go through that, then potentially we'll be open to costs, as I've mentioned before. In regards to parking standards, at the moment we do not have any adopted parking standards. And as you're well aware, each case is taken on its own merits. So we have to take each application before us and what we've got in front of us. And yes, we do listen, as the previous application was refused on highway safety grounds, but unfortunately in this particular case, officers deemed that we couldn't recommend refusal on that basis because of the previous appeal inspector's decision, which was not challenged. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Maria, are there any more speakers?
Yes, Councillor Cribbin, Smith, Ritchie, Harris.
Cribbin, Smith, Ritchie, and who else?
Councillor Harris.
And Harris. Right, after that, I'd like to get to a vote if possible. Right, Councillor Cribbin.
Thank you, Chairman. As members know, I represent a similar sized village of Moulton, and we have numerous problems with our local co-op, with the amount of parking and things, etc., in a conservation area. So I fully have sympathy with the local members with regard to that. But what I hear what the officer Catherine has said with regard to the parking issues, and accept that we are bound by what the appeal inspector has said. But I just for clarification, I didn't hear Councillor Parker add any of those into his proposition. So I think from what we're looking at as members have got before them at the moment is the loss of the actual building and the impact on the conservation area and the loss of amenity is the only reasons we are thinking of refusing it tonight. So whereas I think I don't know how far we can go with regard to accepting that we think there are parking problems and highway issues, but we're not going to put that as a reason for refusal. But it's, I think, perhaps the applicant and people listening. I know probably a lot of Brixworth members, Brixworth residents are listening tonight. We do accept. I mean, I know, and I will accept that there are problems with regard to parking, etc. But they have to appreciate that our committee, is bound by what the inspector said, whether we think it's right or wrong, and we cannot put reason going forward. So, as far as I'm aware, Councillor Parker is restricting his reasons for refusal on the loss of the building itself and the amenity, and not on parking. So, with that in mind, I would be happy to go along with Councillor Parker and Councillor Harris as local members, and I will be voting now, after hearing the whole debate now, that I shall be voting for refusal.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Smith, could I ask Catherine a question? Catherine, is there any softer way, besides giving our reason for refusal, should it be a refusal, is there any softer way of adding a note that we're still not happy about the highway reasons? Rather than it be a refusal, rather than use it as a refusal where we may get costs levied against us, is there any softer approach that we can add to it, concerns?
Through you, Chairman, thank you. Yeah, no, there's nothing stopping if members do refuse the application on the basis of the loss of the actual non-designated heritage asset in the conservation area, and the replacement is not appropriate for that and would cause harm to that designated heritage asset, including the setting of listed buildings, then now if there are third parties, including the parish council, including potentially even local residents, can actually then send comments to the inspectorate to actually comment on that. As far as I'm aware, sort of following confirmation from earlier from Councillor Parker, that it's more of the visual amenity issue through the loss of the non-designated heritage asset, as well as the impact of the new development on that character, i.e. the benefits do not outweigh the harm caused. But there is nothing stopping other people from sending in representations to the planning inspectorate if the applicants do decide to appeal against it. We as local planning authority can only defend the reasons for refusal, which if that's what members wanted to do, but there's nothing stopping from third parties actually highlighting it to the planning inspectorate.
Right, and the planning inspectorate would still consider the representations made by the third parties, and that wouldn't result in us getting costs awarded against us because we didn't use that as a reason. Is that correct?
That's correct. Whether the planning inspectorate would take into account the previous appealing inspector's condition, reason, or his report, and take that into account. But yeah, it will take all the representations. In any case, any representations that are submitted as part of the application process will also be sent to the planning inspectorate so they will also know about the significant or 23 objections, and including the late representations before members tonight. So that will all go off to the planning inspectorate if the application is refused tonight and the applicants decide to appeal against that decision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Smith next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, reference Councillor Longley's comments concerning parking at the existing site. Yeah, I've used that site, and yes, it is a bit of a nightmare, to say the least. Which is interesting because it sort of moves on to Councillor Robertson's view that it's not that bad on the corner, says Councillor Robertson. Well, it will be when we shift all those cars from Spratton Road to this site, that's for sure. The existing parking for the co-op, it currently has 17 spaces outside. It has a further 5 as a pull-in on the Spratton Road. It has a further 15 available in the library. So that's 37 spaces in the existing site. And then we're going to reduce this down to 13. And I think also we need to have our eyes on the Equality Act, that we need to provide parking for disabled people as well. So we've got less parking spaces, and we're not even having an eye on the Equality Act with regard to that. It's a shame we haven't adopted the county's parking standards. I think it's crazy, but we've seen what happens when we become a unitary, I guess. That's all I have to say. I'm in support of Councillor Parker 100%.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Ritchie?
Yeah, apologies. I've been waiting so long that I'd forgotten about the technology. It's a long time since I raised my electronic hand, and a lot that I had to touch on has been raised since then. But my main concern was really just to ask for clarification, which has probably been given in discussion. The developer's agent made the point that that we cannot challenge, a planning committee cannot challenge an inspector's decision. Now, it may be that, yes, that there are risks that, given that an inspector has made comments on a previous but linked to related application. That is there. But it strikes me that if there is such a strong feeling that this site is wrong for a supermarket because of the lack of parking, the lack of access for delivery vehicles, and for all these reasons, we are here to represent people. We clearly as a planning committee, we have got a different sort of role. But I think it would be totally wrong if we simply said that because a planning committee, a planning inspector has taken a view on a previous application, that we cannot say that, look, as a committee, we think that it is entirely, this is the wrong place for a supermarket. We've got a district, we've already got a co-op on a stupid location in Craig. We have got the joys of Bowen Square in the middle of Daventry. It just strikes me that we would have learned nothing from these experiences if we decide that in this space, with so little space around about the building, that we should be contemplating a supermarket here. I accept that it's an interesting building to keep, but it's difficult to keep it if nobody actually wants to use it. But I think that, to me, that the overwhelming argument is that about parking and access.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. The only difficulty is we can use that reason for parking for a reason, but as the officer says, if we do use it, it's going to be difficult to defend, and also we may get costs levied against us. But the reason can be used, we can say it, but we risk the cost, and they've got to stand there and defend it, or write and defend it. That's the difficulty.
Yes, Chair, but I would not want this committee simply to feel cowed by a developer's agent or by a previous planning inspector's decision. Yes, there is a risk, but we're here to actually state what it is that we want for Brixworth that we think is correct, and we should be prepared to say that.
That's quite right, as long as we're aware of the risk. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One final point, really. This is a real opportunity to be creative with the solution for this. And I would urge the agent representing the developers to have dialogue with the parish council, district councillors, and let's find a solution. We know that we need this sort of facility. There are some plans that will come forward, I believe, at some point for further development of the industrial area. Now, I know that's not within the village centre, but again, let's be creative. Why can't we find a way of providing a transport system funded or supported or partly supported by the developer so that we can actually let people have access to better facilities? That means we don't have the traffic issues through the village. I think that basically we need to be creative and think much more broadly. And I would just go back to the first point. This does not fit within a conservation area. It does not add anything to the environment of the building, regardless of any of the other reasons that have been mentioned. My final point is the existing co-op will close. If this goes ahead, it will move. What happens to that building? That then becomes another derelict building, whichever way around you go. That will not be attractive right in the centre of the village, and will definitely have impact on the local businesses there. It's my understanding that when the co-op moved previously from their first location in the village, there was a covenant put in place to prevent any food stores being put in there. If we have that same situation again, that gets us nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. If there are no more, I would like to, I will go to Maria first. No more?
The planning officer indicated she wished to speak.
Who's indicated, sorry?
Catherine.
Catherine, yeah, okay. Right, I will go to Catherine and then we'll go to the vote. Catherine?
Sorry, my apologies. I should have lowered my hand, but no, it's earlier. I was just trying to seek clarification from Councillor Parker regarding his proposal, but I think we've got that, which does not include the highways reason, even though I can tell that there is strong opposition and real concerns about those comments. But no, I would not like to add anything more. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we now have a proposal from Councillor Parker, which has been seconded by Councillor Harris, both local members, that the application be refused for the given reasons. Over to you, Marina.
Councillors, could you please indicate if you're in favour, against or abstaining from refusing the application? Councillor Chandler.
For.
Councillor Cribbin.
For.
Councillor Dabbs.
For.
Councillor Frost.
For.
Councillor Harris.
In favour of rejecting.
Councillor Irving Swift.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Longley.
Against.
Councillor Matton. Councillor Matton.
Sorry, for refusal.
Councillor Parker.
For refusal.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Robertson.
Abstain.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Wesley.
For.
Twelve in favour, 1 against, 1 abstention.
Right, the application is refused. We move on to Hannington next. Not many miles away. So the application number is 0124.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just starting again, reloading the PowerPoint presentation. Members probably be well aware of this site because there's been a number of applications in or surrounding this site. For there's the glamping lodges, which members refused sort of earlier this year, late last year. Now, this proposal is for a new grounds maintenance building for the purposes of one of the businesses on site. There's been a new building built here to make sure two sites are merged into one. One was already on this site and one was in another place in Walgrave. So they pretty much consolidated their operations on one site, hence why that was approved. Now, what they were seeking to do in sort of policy is to create a standalone building, not attached to the existing buildings surrounding, where you've got, here's a building, there's a building, and here's some more buildings. They're doing another freestanding maintenance workshop building, which, yes, is set back from the road, but on plan form, officers consider it shouldn't be allowed in sense of principle. It hasn't been demonstrated enough that there is actually a need for a standalone building, and why can't it be the existing buildings extended? Now, what you're maybe hearing is that they can't do an extension because it will be interfere with an existing sort of parking and throughway to the existing new build, which has been built. Now, what the issue is that, because potentially this development could actually change its location for the vehicle movements in and out of the site. So it's really more of a in principle, and also the impact on the character, the plan form of the impact on the character and appearance of the locality. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. We have one speaker, Mr. Timothy, who's the agent. Mr. Timothy. Mr. Timothy, are you there?
Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee.
You are there, right?
I'm there, thank you.
You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. Mere Farm Business Park is an established employment area that is located in the rural area. The planning permission is sought, as your officers just outlined to you, to erect a building to accommodate equipment used in the maintenance of the existing business park. The National Planning Policy Framework advises the sustainable growth and expansion of all types of businesses in rural areas can be enabled by planning decisions that allow, amongst other things, for well-designed new buildings. In this context, your joint core strategy states that rural areas play an important role in the local economy. Providing new employment opportunities in the rural areas can help combat the decline of traditional rural employment and address the issue of increased out-commuting. The framework recognises that in rural areas, businesses may be located beyond existing settlements and in locations not well served by public transport. In these circumstances, the framework advises that it will be important to ensure that development is sensitive to its surroundings. The building is to be sited immediately alongside existing buildings in the business park. You'll have seen from the photographs it's contained to the north by rising land and existing trees. The building is modest in scale. It has a ridge height of some 6 metres, like that of adjacent buildings. The building is of portal frame construction to be clad in profile metal sheeting, coloured dark green to match that of the existing building. The building will look like a modern agricultural building, of which there are many across the surrounding area. In this respect, the building will be consistent with the character and appearance of existing buildings in the business park, including that which you recently permitted in August 2019. The building would not appear isolated, as your officers suggest. Rather, it will be viewed in the context of the converted former agricultural buildings that comprise the Mere Farm Business Park. The proposed development can take place without causing harm to the natural built and historic environment. It will not affect the access arrangements or parking provision from the site, and you'll note from your report that there is no objection from the Highways Authority. The proposal can proceed without harming the living conditions of any nearby residential property. So in short, the proposed building will ensure that the quality and appearance of the Mere Business Park is maintained to a high standard, and in so doing it will safeguard employment and increase the likelihood of more investment and jobs being created. In the context of the economic situation that we find ourselves in post-COVID-19, this development will make a small yet meaningful contribution to the economy, and is precisely the sort of development that the framework and the West Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy seeks to encourage. In the light of these circumstances, I invite you to grant planning permission contrary to the recommendations of your officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Local member's not on the planning committee but has requested to speak. So Councillor Warno, you may
Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Yes, I've chosen to speak on this issue. I mean, the key issues noted to refuse the application relate to this new building being in open countryside, that there is limited evidence for an additional freestanding building, and it's isolated siting away from the main complex. I've got really 4 key observation points on this proposal. I mean, this is a modest building. It's supporting effective functioning of a rural business on an existing business complex. Its design, as the agent has just said, is similar to other converted agricultural buildings on this site. So it's not going to dominate and bring any new elements of design into this area. The application is unlikely to cause any impact on the local highway network because there's no actual extra staff at this time you're going to utilise this building. It's been pointed out in August last year, we did consent and agree to place a substantial warehouse, which is actually just 30 metres away from this proposed shed site. And that was based on the current policies. So what I just want to do is actually take you into some photographs. If we could go back to the first rather boring one here. No, that's the good one with the skip. This is a photograph taken last weekend. You can see that there is a concrete hard standing. It actually delimitates the site and the size of this building. There is a 5 meter bund behind, that's this soil stroke rough, rugged, grassy bit. That's 5 meters in height. So really, this is tucked into a corner, right on the boundary of this applicant's site. The lorries that will be coming in to the warehouse, and I'll show you where the warehouse is in relation to this in the next picture, actually drive round this bend and come into the warehouse. So as you can see in the second picture, you have the substantial crisis warehouse we approved last year. I think from memory, it's around about 30 meters by 26 meters and 6 meters at its height, because the whole area, this whole industrial area you're looking at, is actually being dropped down by 2 meters. That was part of the rules to make sure it doesn't stick out in the locality, because it is in surrounding rural area. The new proposed shed, there again, where the skip is, if you could go back one, please, thanks. The new height of this building is 6 meters, so it's exactly in line with a crisis courier. So that's the next photograph again, please. That's it. So there is going to be nothing standing above, and you can see actually it's all part of an existing site. So finally, I just want to show you the last photograph. So imagine I'm standing with the skip behind me. So I'm looking towards the access road, which is where the HGVs come up. And these are the other buildings, which are just 10 meters away from where where the applicant is proposing the building. So it's not separated away. It's part of this unit. The whole area is completed. And the other thing I want to point out is you will see that there is a lot of civil engineering equipment and lorries just to the right of this, which is the next landowner's area where he stores all of these lorries. So we're not talking of open countryside. It's very much an industrial site. So really, in conclusion, and after my recent visit, I consider this proposal is not contrary to the policies that we've actually looked at. And that is under R2, which really supports the rural economy and the expansion of an on-site business. This does it. This building does it. The second one is RA6. The whole area is an open countryside area, but this is an individual development marooned within it, and this forms part of it. This new building forms part of it. It's an appropriate scale for its location. It's not going to have any impact on the character at all. As I've explained, even if you were standing in the woodland at the back, you would only see 1 meter of the ridge line. And finally, EMV 10, which is all about ensuring the design of the development, its height, its mass, and will it sit in its surroundings. I think I've just shown you, yes, it will sit in the surroundings and parallel to the big building that we approved last year. So really, this new building will be sited so it is seen as part of an existing industrial complex. Overall, given the siting, its design, its appearance of the proposed shed, and the construction of an additional building on this site is not going to have any adverse impact on the character and appearance of the locality, and that's in my opinion. So I recommend that we go against officers' advice this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Warner. Right, members. Have we got any indications, Maria?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Wesley and Councillor Longley and Councillor James so far.
Wesley, Longley.
And James.
Councillor Wesley, Longley and James. Okay, Councillor Wesley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that Councillor Warner has just told us. I really don't see any issue with this. I mean, it's only a few weeks ago we were talking about a building at Ravensthorpe where officers were really keen to tell us it was no more than an agricultural building being stuck in the middle of in what was actually open countryside. This is a building on what is in essence an industrial estate in open countryside, but everything's already there. And as for it should be attached to another building, well, if it was attached to another building, it would still be there. And you can see quite clearly why they wouldn't want it attached to another building. It's because you want to get vehicles in and around it, and it's a separate shed. I can't see anything wrong with it, but let me listen to what other people say to tell me otherwise. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Longley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I thought that Councillor Wooler put it very, very, very well indeed. It's an industrial estate, that's fairly clear. And what I'm surprised at is that this actually has come to committee. I would have thought this was pretty straightforward, frankly, and would have gone through on delegated authority. So I'm actually surprised to see it here tonight. But you can see the hard standing is already there. It just seems to me such a very straightforward issue. So I will absolutely be supporting it. Thank you, Chair.
Just to tell you, it came to committee because it's up for refusal and it's a member calling. As it would have been a delegated refusal.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor James.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm quite content with this application. I can't see anything wrong with putting this building there. It's not situated too far away from the rest of the established complex. When I read the officer's report, I imagined it sort of on its own in a green field, but then to see it in the context of the other buildings with a 5-metre bund around it puts it all into place. So I have no problem with this application. I'd be very pleased to propose that we go against officer's advice here and recommend approval.
Can you give me the plain reasons first, Councillor?
That it's already an established industrial use, and this is merely enhancing that in the interest of promoting rural businesses.
Right. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Robinson is waving.
Change my name again, Councillor. Anyway, yes, thank you, Chair.
Your second. I asked for a seconder. You're seconding, presumably. Right.
I would like to just have a few words about it. I was unclear, really, about why the planning officers don't like it, and I'd like, just to ask Catherine that what is the reason for that? Apart from to expand on it, what I mean to say, would you expand on her reasons for?
Catherine, would you like to answer that?
It's as if members read the report, it's sort of clearly sort of set out in the sense that yes, there is policies which support the existing rural businesses. However, it hasn't really been demonstrated that there's been a need to have a separate building, whereas a existing building which could be extended could be seen as part of the overall development, rather than having lots of individual buildings spread along around the site. Members are most welcome to take a different approach to that and go against officers' advice. That's your prerogative, and that's why it's come to planning committee. But that's the really reasons behind it. It's more of the overall development of the site. Yes, the crisis building, which is the building which was built, they provided justification why they needed to do that, and it's more about consolidating the business in one specific place rather than having it in more than one location. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Maria, who have you got?
Councillor Parker and Councillor Harris.
Parker, Harris. I can see Councillor Longley waving his arms. Did you want to speak, Councillor Longley? No. Okay. Councillor Parker first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd have to go against officers' advice on this one because it is on an industrial estate. And I actually do understand why they want to put it in the corner from a traffic flow management point of view. You wouldn't want that on the other side with Arctics coming round I just think that's a recipe disaster, to be honest with you. I think the 5 metre bund is also very important, because from the other side, which is scrubland and trees, you'd only be able to see 1 metre of the building. So I think it's actually exactly in the right position, to be honest with you. And that's why I would go against officers' advice on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I would generally agree with that principle. It does seem to be a development in addition to an existing industrial area. It was just a query, really, that there was conversation, I think, from Councillor Woolnough about supporting the economy, but I thought I heard no additional workers or traffic. So it's just a query as to exactly how that is going to benefit the economy. I mean, it may be that it just supports an existing business that's there, but it was just a point of clarification.
Right, it's not in the proposal anyway. But do you want to quickly answer that, Councillor Woolnough?
Yes, I'll answer it to Councillor Harris. My understanding is it is supporting a tenant that's already on site, who's tried to find room to store this grounds equipment and garden machinery. And there is no other location within the site and no other storage capabilities. So it is supporting the business on the site. And from what I understand, there's 2 men that will be working in it, but there's no office within that building. That's as much as I know at this point.
Okay, thank you. Any more speakers, Maria?
No, Chairman.
No? Okay, we have a proposal that the application be refused. Sorry, that be approved, contrary to officers' advice, that be approved, which has been seconded. All those in favour of the application being approved, please tell Maria. Marina, I beg your pardon, similar name.
Councillor Chandler.
For.
Councillor Cribbin.
For.
Councillor Dabbs.
For.
Councillor Frost.
Abstain.
Councillor Harris.
Abstain.
Councillor Irving Swift.
Sorry, I have a problem sometime to unmute. 4.
Councillor James.
4.
Councillor Longley.
4.
Councillor Matton.
4.
Councillor Parker.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Robertson.
4.
Councillor Smith.
4.
Councillor Wesley.
4.
12 in favour, 2 abstentions.
Thank you, Marina. The application is approved. Next application is in Spratton and it's 0243.
Bear with me, Chairman. Considering that the previous application, before we go on to the next one in Spratton, can we ask about planning conditions, or are members happy for officers to put sort of the standard planning conditions on, such as the 3-year time limit, development in accordance with the plans, and materials to be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority?
Well, planning committee, that's normally what the committee would do in a case like this. Are you happy to do so? If you're not happy, wave a hand in front of you if you're not happy. There's no hands waving, so the committee is happy. Okay. So now we are in Spratton, or we will be when Catherine flicks across to another slide.
Yeah, so yeah, this is the last time you've got to hear from me sort of in regards to presenting an application. So basically this is a site in the open countryside to the south of the village of Spratton, which is up here in the open countryside. What sort of the history behind it is we gave planning permission for the conversion of the existing building to residential, so former barn buildings. It's understood that works commenced to convert it. However, during the conversion, the owners of the site actually demolished the building. So what the proposal is for a new residential building in the open countryside. The design is very similar to the previous approval and to the previous application. However, the issue is that there's nothing to fall back, because the previous application was for the conversion of the building, not for a new residential standalone building. So it's really regarding the principle of the residential. It should be a conversion rather than a new build. So you can see by the photos before, members, of the existing or the previous barn, which has been demolished. So you can see they're quite substantial. In the previous application back in 2005, there was actually a structural survey which actually indicated that the barns could actually be converted. So these are what was there before. And this is the access to the site. And this is the views up and down the road. So you can see here where the barns have been demolished, and sort of the brick has been, or the stone has been kept. So this is the area as existing. So there's no barns there any longer. And again, as existing. So therefore, this application is recommended for refusal. It will be resulting in new build residential property. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Local member wishes to speak, Councillor Peck.
Chairman, if I may, there's two issues you need to address first. There is a speaker, and also...
Oh, I beg your pardon. I do apologise.
In a couple of minutes, it will be 9:15, and you will have to vote on whether you wish to continue.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm sorry I missed the speaker. We'll go back to the speaker in a second. Firstly, normally the committee has to vote on whether they want to continue to finish this application and one more application. Do you wish to continue, or do you want a 5-minute comfort break when we finish this one?
Continue. Continue, Chair.
You want to finish it?
Wrap it up,
Yes.
Chair.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay, continue. It's all for continue. Right. So we have a speaker then, and we have Mr. Robertson, who's the applicant. And I apologise for missing you out, sir.
Right. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Committee. My name is Jason Richardson, and on behalf of my father, Colin, I am the applicant and also responsible for the reasons that this application has been brought before you tonight for a final decision. Our family has lived at Spratton Grange for over 45 years. Millars Barn is an integral part and sits amongst the trees and hedges we have planted over the years. It holds a special place for our family, and it is intended that my mother and father would retire to Millars Barn, allowing the next generation to take over the responsibilities for the Grange. We were delighted at gaining planning permission to convert Millars Barn. It was genuinely redundant and would provide the perfect home, allowing us as a family to remain together and plan for the next generation. I took it upon myself to manage the conversion, a decision with hindsight I now regret. I now realise that I relied upon advice from others who were clearly not cognizant with this type of development. I realised after becoming concerned and consulting again with the original architects that I had naively breached the line between a new building and a conversion. I was devastated to receive this news. I closed down the site immediately and instructed the architects to submit this new application in an endeavour to recover the benefits of the original permission. The application is supported by my explanation as to why I had arrived at this desperate state of affairs. We have carefully read and considered the issues raised in the officer's report, and we respectfully suggest that we are confident we can undertake and replicate the original barn to achieve the same outcome as if it had been converted. We have the original salvage materials stored on site, original survey plans and photographs. We will also continue to involve the architects to work with us and carry out regular site inspections. Over the years, the work we have undertaken has enhanced the natural environment. We have planted over 1,000 trees and constructed a lake, the result of which has greatly and noticeably increased the amount of wildlife. Much of this surrounds Millars Barn and makes an important contribution to the heritage of the local landscape setting. The report considers its eligibility as a non-designated heritage asset. We trust councillors will be willing to exercise their discretion tonight and allow planning permission. We earnestly seek to restore sensitively and with all due regard the contributions that implementing the original planning permission would have achieved. We are not interested in commercial gain, but we are keen to continue our work in custody of Spratton Grange and Millars Barn. Finally, I apologise profusely for asking you to exercise your discretion. I am respectful and fully appreciative that this situation should have been avoided had I taken the correct advice, something for which I take full responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Right, now, Councillor Peck, it's over to you for your input. Councillor Peck, we can't hear you.
We'll see.
Sorry? I can't hear her. Can anybody else?
No.
Right. Well, while we're waiting somewhere, I have an email from John Shepherd. So I'll read that out while we're trying to get Councillor Peck back in. As you know, the applicant has asked for my assistance in this unusual application. I would make short comments having read the report to the committee. There are clearly formidable technical objections to this application, but I suggest it's open to the committee to take a broad view on the substance of the application, bearing in mind particular, number one, the concept of new residential use of the building is acknowledged. Number two, the proposal is acknowledged to create a building on the same footprint and the same scale, design and materials, my emphasis, as the former building. The degree of present created by the new build would be similar to the former building. And report summary 30, para 3. Officers, number 3. Officers do not seem to be arguing that the building, when completed, will be distinguishable, cool, that's one to get your mouth around, from that authorised to be built by the earlier permission. The difference is the form, not substance. The objections to the form of the application are properly highlighted by officers, but I suggest on balance that members are quite entitled to take a broader view and allow the building anticipated by the 2005 application to be constructed. So that was what John sent in. Now, have we got Councillor Peck back on yet?
Am I there?
You're there, are you?
Hello.
Hello, yes, we can hear you. Carry on.
Well, I fully support this. I don't see any reason why not to support the fact that they want to put their parents, they're building somewhere to put their parents, and they have done the best they can.
Okay. Have you finished, Sarah? Or have you dropped out? Can you hear me, Sarah?
Yeah.
Have you finished saying what you wanted to say? Sarah, if you can hear me, have you finished? No, all I've got is a gurgling noise.
Sorry.
You're back on now. You just say yes, you're finished, or no, you're not. You keep coming on for a couple of seconds and that's it. I think we're losing signal your way. I'll try once more, then if not, if you get the signal back, I'll allow you to interrupt and finish off if you haven't finished. Can you hear me now? No, obviously not. But we get the gist of what she's saying. I have an email with what she was saying, so I could. That's on part of John Shepherd's one. I will read it out in case she doesn't come back. I've been contacted by Colin Richardson in this planning matter. I would ask the committee to consider allowing the building to be constructed, as the proposed building will be identical to that which was given approval earlier, the 2015 application. The applicant has informed me that after completing the demolition and then being made aware that they needed council permission in order to proceed, they immediately stopped work and started the process of communicating with the council and the application. The applicant has made clear that the objectives have always been to create a dwelling that is eco-friendly, and the building will have the same profile as the original barn. The applicant has lived on the site for 45 years, and I understand the plan to develop Millars barn for him and his wife to live there. Best wishes, Sarah Peck. Are you back yet, Sarah? No, well, if you can hear me, I've read your... something happened then. No.
Well,
Well, I've read...
it dropped out completely according to my file.
Right. Well, I think I've read out what her email was, and I've read out what John Shepherd's were. So I think we should carry on with members now. Do you have a list of members wishing to speak or not?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Irving Swift and Councillor Wesley first.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. It's a very, very sad case, and I wish I could go against officer advice, because it is such a sad case. Unfortunately, the applicant must have benefited from a Q application. It's a very technical. It's when the rules were relaxed in open countryside and you could convert barn. Now, if we go against officer advice, it's going to open so many kind of worms, and it is very, very sad. If the applicant will not have destroyed his barn, I will have no problem. Now, because he is building a new house completely, even if it is the same things, it sounds completely bonkers, and I agree with the feeling of the applicant, but that is completely against planning rule, and therefore I will propose that with a heavy heart we go with officer advice. So that is my proposal.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? I see a hand raised, which is Councillor Wesley's, and you are the second one to speak, Councillor Wesley. So
yeah, I'm not going to say much, Chair, because pretty much Cecile, Councillor Irving Swift has just said what I was going to say. I mean, that was a heartfelt plea from the applicant, and massive sympathies. But of course, we are where we are with this, and just reading the report on page 75, the last paragraph, continuing on to page 76, pretty much says it all, really. And you know, we would open ourselves up for, I know we talk about precedent, there being no precedent, but there is precedent, and this makes it really difficult in my view. So that's why I'm seconding it. But I do feel really sorry for the applicant. It's a terrible situation if that was the case. Thank you, Chair.
Maria, thank you.
And I can clarify that it was planning permission was granted in 2015 for a conversion of the agricultural building. It wasn't a class Q, but the point is still valid. And the next speakers are Councillor Matton and Councillor James.
Matton and James. Councillor Matton, please.
Thank you. Gosh, this is a difficult one. I was in agreement with the first two councillors that spoke, but then the next two councillors did make a good case. However, what I would very much like to understand, and still don't, and I would like to take advice through you, Chair, from officers, are we setting a precedent? Because it's my understanding that we judge each case on its own merits, and we do not set precedents. If in this case it does appear to be a genuine mistake, the applicant still wishes to put a building up that we already approved, and I would like to support that applicant, one of our residents who's made a mistake and has made a heartfelt plea, but I certainly would not wish to set a precedent that would allow other people to build houses in the countryside where there isn't already a barn. So through you, Chair, can I...
Yes, I'll get the officer to answer you,
well,
Peter.
Perhaps the legal
Councillor Matton.
view.
Councillor, can you answer that, Catherine?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, each case is supposed to be taken on its own merits. The main issue is sort of the principle of actually a residential building on this site. Yes, there are policies which allow for the conversion of the existing building to other uses, and as Maria did point out, it was a planning permission rather than a Part Q application. So we actually gave planning permission rather than it was permitted development. Now, in a sense of setting a precedent, yes, potentially there could be seen that, yeah, I can knock my barn down as Daventry District Council give planning permission for the conversion, a new building on that. Yes, mistakes can happen, and yes, it's unfortunate in this particular case that the barn was actually demolished, but then again, each case is taken on its own merits, and if you have got good reasons to go against the principle of residential development in the open countryside, then members are entitled to do that, but be careful with that decision. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. When the application first came in, it did have a structural engineer's report to say the barn was convertible, didn't it? And they had to provide that. Catherine, is that so?
That's correct. The original sort of structural survey, which was submitted with the 2015 application, considered that the building was capable of being converted.
Right.
Can I ask a supplementary, please?
Yeah, you can indeed, sir.
But the planning permission is already there. We wouldn't be setting a precedent for people to knock barns down and put new buildings.
Yes, you would.
On where those barns used to be, if the gentleman has knocked the barn down after the planning permission had already been given, surely.
No, you're not right. But Catherine,
if I could interrupt there for a minute. The planning consent that was granted was for conversion. This is clearly not a conversion. I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Matton. I think what you're saying, Councillor Matton, is that the consent has been granted for a dwelling, and as such, where's the harm in allowing a rebuild of a building which of an identical structure on the same spot, on the same footprint? But that's where the conflict comes in, really, is because what was granted was a conversion. This is not a conversion. This is a new build. Obviously, it's down to members to consider whether or not they go with officers' advice. But from an officer's position, that's the recommendation we have to give in light of the decision to completely demolish the building. But it's down to members to consider whether they feel that there is insufficient harm that would result as part of the proposal. Hopefully that might assist you, Councillor Matton.
Yeah, no, as Chung has said, the previous permission was for the conversion. It wasn't for the rebuild. And also, even though works appeared to have commenced on that conversion, once the building was knocked down, you can't convert something which is not there. So it would result in a new build. Now, as an agricultural building, it would not be previously developed land. It would result in sort of it wouldn't be previously developed land because it was an agricultural building, and it's only allowed, or it's only built for agricultural purposes, in which you normally expect buildings in the open countryside to facilitate the enterprise.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Matton?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. No, I've lost my list. Who's the next speaker, Maria?
Councillor James, and then Councillor Longley.
James, then Longley. Okay, Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. As I see it, this is a building that was in existence as at 1st of July 1948, when the Town and Country Planning Act 47 came in. Therefore, the Richardsons had the right to rebuild those barns exactly as they were. So, what happened? Well, these barns were demolished. I don't know whether the planning permission was implemented to change it to residential, but we certainly know that the barns were demolished. And as I see it, the Richardsons can now, if they so wish, rebuild that barn back how it was before. And if
we'll ask Catherine that, if you like. Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman. Now, the barns were there, yes, and they got permission for the conversion. As I understand it, the conversion was commenced for the development which they got planning permission. Now, if they want to put new buildings on, it would require planning permission for replacement of buildings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So the fact that it was already there before town planning came into existence in a major form is irrelevant then. I'm sure that he has the right to rebuild those barns, and if he does so, then he could reapply again for residential use or pursue a Q application.
Catherine?
No, in a sense, the buildings were there. It's a bit like sort of, if you have a residential building, there's quite a lot of residential buildings which were built prior to that date, which have been demolished, and planning permission has been required for their new development. So it would require planning permission for a new building on that site.
Right.
I'm not totally convinced. I'm not totally convinced, Chairman, on that.
Okay.
It's a legal point, really. It's very technical. The worries about the whole of moving on to Q applications was the fact that people could convert a barn to residential, but it wouldn't stop them erecting another barn some distance away and starting the whole process over again. So I'm wondering whether, looking at it from that point of view, that the applicant here could simply, I think they call it third schedule rights, and rebuild his barn to as it was before, exactly like it was before. We've got photos, that's easy to do, and then simply either reapply or go for a Q application. In which case, we're probably wasting our time or being a little bit unfair. We may as well bite the bullet now and say, well, we understand what has happened. This was very regrettable, but on this occasion, we are prepared to carry on and grant planning permission. Thank you.
I'm going to make a...
James, that you're probably referring to part 6, whereby there are permitted development rights for the rebuilding of agricultural buildings. But as part of the building is part 6 for the building of agricultural buildings that have to be essential for the purposes of agriculture. Clearly, the applicant has already demonstrated that these buildings were not essential for the purposes of agriculture, and hence why the application for its conversion was submitted. I think members need to focus on the predicament that the applicant is in that officers aren't able to recommend an approval for this application for the purposes that, the reasons that it is quite clearly a new build. The consideration for members is whether or not they feel that there are exceptional circumstances, and for them to weigh up the harm if they are looking to support the applicant in his plight.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I must say, the time I've been on the committee, I've seen probably either 4 or 5, I can't remember exactly, but that have ended up like this for some reason or other. Let's put it like that. And not one of them was allowed. I don't know one of them that was ever allowed in my time on it. Anyway, the next speaker is Maria. Oh yes, Councillor Longley.
Thank you, Chair. As I understand it, this is as far as I can see, this is a very genuine and honest error. And if I'm correct, that the applicant has come to the council and effectively confessed to this error. They haven't been sort of found out, as it were. So it's a genuine come back to the council. Look, we made a mistake. This is the situation. He might well, bearing in mind where it is, gone ahead and built it himself and trusted to luck. Anyway, he didn't. He's done, as I see it, the right thing. So I think the recommendation is little short of bizarre. We've got a unit that was designed and was agreed at planning. Not now we're going to get exactly the same, and yet we're saying this is not acceptable. So I think Chung pointed out the way here quite well, in that you're pointing out that you are not in a position as a planner to recommend its approval, but it's up to the members to do the right thing. And I think we should do the right thing. I just cannot see for any reason why we would turn this down. I would see that as bizarre. Thank you, Chair.
Maria.
Next councillors to speak are Richie, Robertson, Smith and Irving Swift. That's all.
Richie, Robinson.
Smith and Irving Swift.
Who was the third one, sorry?
Councillor Smith. Councillor
Smith. Smith and Irving Swift. Right, okay. Right, so Councillor Richie first then.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I begin first with just a small point? There have been references as to who it was planned would live in this new cottage or the conversion, if it had been a conversion. And you know, we've had one planning application that we've already considered where the issue of who was going to live somewhere has arisen. Should we not have stronger rules? We take decisions on the properties. We are not going to say that something will have planning permission because particular people need accommodation and will live in it. That would suggest the planning permission should come to an end if they decide to sell up or move on. So I just mentioned that one thing that I sometimes find irritating. But I'm speaking, I essentially agree with most things that Councillor Irving Swift has said. But where I have a slight difference with some of the speakers with whom I essentially agree, we're here to judge the applications, not the applicants. I don't say this is for me to decide whether or not this was a genuine mistake, but frankly, I'm not convinced. If you go back to 2015, when the application was made for a conversion of the then existing barn, if you decide that you want accommodation in a particular spot, You're only going to convert a barn if there is something very, very special about it. I assume here there was not, because it was knocked down, or if because you know that is the only way forwards. Why did they decide then to go along the route of a conversion and then knock it down? When this latest application has been made, I mean, you know, these weren't things that were designed, you know, on the back of an envelope or in the pub. These are proper architects' drawings that, you know, that have been put forward. They've been put forward by people who are knowledgeable and in the business. I'm not convinced at all. My apologies to the applicant. It's not up to me to decide whether there's a genuine mistake, but I am not convinced. And I just feel that if we do not support the officers on this decision, we're leaving the whole process open to abuse.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to remind councillors of a couple of instances here. If you remember some time ago, not that long, that a farmer had a similar problem. His house was, or the end of his house was falling down, and he demolished it and then realised he needed it. It went to the extent of taking the foundations out, and it's on Watford Road, by the way, near West Haddon. And we granted him permission to rebuild there, which he did. That's one instance of exactly what's going on here. Secondly, another farming gentleman applied for, I think it's called Section Q or Park Q, I can't remember, to convert a disused farm building. And the plans put forward, although were adequate, were dreadful, and planning permission was given for him to remove that building and build a brand new property of a better design. Having said all that, what we're talking about here has been done before. There is no doubt about that. Now, the officers are quite right. This is technically incorrect. They're quite right in saying that they are recommending it for refusal simply because it's building in open countryside. Technically now, there is no barn there, so it's a new build. And it has to be a very exceptional architectural design to be approved at all. However, we have a discretion because of what's happened before. And I think that we're going to use that discretion. And I feel that we should grant, go against officers' advice, which is purely technical, and grant permission.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the original application back in 2015, there was a heritage asset survey produced, quite detailed. And if you actually read through it, there is a loss here. The building's been knocked down. Okay, it may have not had a lot going for it, but it had something going for it, and we were very clear on our permission at the time. So I'm absolutely with the officers on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Irving Swift next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I go back to Councillor Robinson. It's very dangerous to compare things. One, he compared with a farmer. A farmer, there is a need, and if he lost his farm, he could say that he needs a farm to attend his stock or his things. There, we do not have a farm, and our planning officer says so because the building were redundant. I agree that I am very sad for the applicant because he's in a position that he didn't want to be. Now, also, when Councillor Robinson went and said, oh, we had a chap who did and built something else, but he didn't demolish. He asked, and I remember because we had a long debate, and he put a planning application for a change of the look of the building. And there we had a very intensive debate. And we all agreed that the new proposal was better, looked better, because we would have looked stupid otherwise, and even the officer was of that agreement, and therefore it was for to agree. Now, what we have in front of us tonight, it's unfortunately the officer, and the officer explained it very well, is because it was completely erased to the floor, and we have no other option, because otherwise it will change quite considerably the law. And if we want to change the law, we have to go to our MP for them to change the law. It's not up to us to suddenly decide that it's okay to do in open countryside. I remind councillor that unfortunately we have a plan, if we spend a lot of money on our plan, and if you go against that, and I wish I could go with the applicant. I promise him if I could, I would, but because of all what we have in front of all our policy, I think it would be a huge mistake. And that is the first time I have been on the planning committee for 7 years or 8 years, I can't remember. And very seldom I feel so sorry. That's one of the decisions that I cannot go against officer. And I'm sure some officer will agree with us, but I will confirm that I will go with officer advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember that application that was referred to, and it was one that we brought to the government's attention. It was when conversions of barn to residential, and we had one in that looked like a Nissan hut, which actually qualified under the government scheme, and we would have had a house that looked like absolutely stupid, and it would be better to have been rebuilt, and we brought it to the government's attention. I remember it well. Any more speakers, Maria?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Parker, Councillor Dabbs and Councillor Robertson.
So Parker, Dabbs and Robertson.
Yes, Chairman.
All right, and then we'll go to the vote, okay? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. If we put aside what all the applicants and the things like that, what it refers to, I'm just looking at what we're doing as a planning committee. When I looked at the structural report, 3.1, I think it was, confirmed that these barns are capable of being converted to a residential accommodation. So that was from structural engineers. There was no doubt from professional body this could be done. It's been now knocked down, so it's a new build in open countryside. End of story. It's against policies. There were conditions which we laid down in the original application, and we all talk about conditions and them being met, and here we could actually just dismiss them. I don't see the point of having conditions if we go against the policies and things like that. One thing the applicant can do, of course, as any applicant can do, if anything gets turned down, he can go to appeal and ask an inspector what they think. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dabbs.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think on this one that we've obviously got some members for going with officer's recommendation and some going against. So my personal opinion is that we should actually allow this to go ahead, as in we go against officer's recommendation. But we should make sure that very carefully we condition it to make sure that what turns up on this site is what should have turned up on this site. So the original plans of the conversion, in terms of what it will look like, and maybe the build would actually be slightly better, because it does strike me maybe things have been found out in terms of the structure, and maybe there were inadequacies in the structural survey that perhaps it didn't go into great enough detail, who knows. But I think we should allow this to go ahead, but make sure it is subject to the plans that were in the original planning application, which was approved.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you again, Chair. Basically, I just want to make myself clear when I mentioned those two applications that we approved. The first one that I mentioned, in fact, was, I said it was on the Watford Road, that is the West Haddon to Watford Road. And I'm sure you'll remember it. They actually did exactly what this applicant has done. they knocked their building down and then realised that they wanted it, they needed it, and we granted them permission to build a new one.
Was it residential to residential though?
Sorry again?
Was it residential
It
originally?
wasn't anything. It was part of the farm buildings. That's the only difference. In fact, it was part of the farm, which is indeed this is. And anyway, they pulled it all down, including removing the foundations, and then decided they needed it. And it's been rebuilt since. It looks quite nice. But anyway, that's beside the point. We can do this if we want to. This is a matter of technicality that we're here to decide on. And
Thank
I
you.
therefore feel that we should grant permission for it.
Thank you. Right. We have a proposal that the application be approved.
To
now-
clarify, Chairman, the recommendation was to go with officer's advice.
No, you're dead right. The recommendation was. Thank you, Maria. It is getting a bit late. The recommendation was to refuse the application, which was seconded. All those in favour, please. Well, you're voting for refusing the application or against refusing the application. Maria?
Councillor Chantler,
For.
Councillor Cribbin,
For.
Councillor Dabbs,
Against.
Councillor Frost,
For.
Councillor Harris,
For.
Councillor Irving Swift,
For.
Councillor James,
Against.
Councillor Longley,
Against.
Councillor Matton,
Abstain.
Councillor Parker,
For.
Councillor Ritchie,
For.
Councillor Robertson,
Against.
Councillor Smith,
For.
Councillor Wesley,
For.
9, 4, 1.
9 in favour, 4 against, 1 abstention.
Thank you. The application is refused. Next application is in Long Buckby and it's 0290, I think. Yes. Over to you, Chung.
Thank you, Chairman. I shall be as brief as I possibly can. The site lies within the confines of Long Buckby village to the west side of Station Road. It did originally form part of the outline planning permission for redevelopment of the larger site and was allocated as an overspill car park. Following development of the large overspill car park on the east side of Station Road, this obligation was removed from the outline planning consent, and the site currently benefits from planning permission for 10 units with 40% affordable housing provision. The current application seeks consent for the provision of 9 units with no affordable housing unit. The NPPF advises that local authorities should not seek for affordable housing provision for units which are for developments which have less than 10 units. However, councils are able to apply a lower affordable housing threshold where up-to-date evidence is available. In this case, there's no up-to-date housing needs survey to support the lowering of the threshold, and policy compliant provision of affordable housing has been secured on the wider development site and on other development sites within the immediate area. As such, officers consider that there is no up-to-date evidence to demonstrate that a lower affordable housing threshold should be applied in this particular case. If you look at the report, equally there are no objections to the application from any consultees in regards to the parish council or the neighbours or any technical consultees either. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. 2 local members, myself is one. I have no problem with it. Councillor Longley, you're the other local member.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I've no problem with it. In fact, it's very unusual for something like this to come out without any objections. So I haven't got a problem with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I Well, I'll come back then, and I'll propose that that the application be approved as per.
Well, would you prefer it if I propose this, Chair? I'm very happy to.
Yeah, I would. It would be
Yeah.
better if you did it. Yeah.
I'll take that as a proposal then.
Thank you. You have a seconder, Councillor Robertson. You wish to speak, Councillor Robertson?
No, I'd just like to see the drawings again because I'm not clear exactly where it is.
It's right as close as you can get. I wouldn't want to live there personally, but it's right near a railway line.
Well, no, all I can see is the development. I can't see where it is. Where's the site plan? Where's the location plan?
As you come down the station hill, it's on the right, just before the railway and the goods yard.
Oh, I know. I thought we were going to put an old folks home there. Anyway, yeah, okay.
Oh, well, there was permissions for everything originally. Yeah,
The old folks' home is further.
that's a different place. Yeah. Okay. And Maria, do we have any other comments?
I have hands up from Wesley, Richie and Dabbs.
Councillor Wesley, followed by Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. No real problem in overall principle on this one. It is a development. It is I have to say, it's a horrible location, and I'm not sure we should be sort of saying there should be at least sound mitigation and everything else for the people that are going to live there. But I am concerned about the affordable housing level and about how this has been arrived at. The MPPF saying that it's on 10 or over, but our local policies say 5, don't they? And you know, what are our local policies for if they're not for anything? I just don't understand where this is coming from. And I know that case law has been put forward to explain this, but at the end of the day, our local decision in our district for our council is for a lesser number where affordable housing has to come into play. Now, you know, referring to some case somewhere else is almost irrelevant for me. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but this was going to be a car park originally, wasn't it?
Correct.
This site was going to be a car park. And in essence, it was an S106 obligation on the developer, i.e. they were going to have to put a car park in, not get revenue for building houses. The developers already had a gain on their overall development by not having to fulfill the S106. They've had a big benefit of this, 9 or 10 houses, and now they've just come popping in under the 10 on the MPPF, and then just basically ignoring us as a local authority. And then disappointingly, we've got members just sort of saying, oh, well, yeah, that's okay. Well, for me, it's not okay. I think that we're just riding roughshod over what we've decided as a district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would one of the planners like to explain, or would you like to explain, Maria, the 5 and 10 bit?
I was going to pass it over to the officer, but I think it's worth clarifying whether there's going to be no affordable housing. Is there actually going to be a contribution, a commuted sum for affordable housing provision elsewhere?
I can't really clarify that point, whether there's going to be a contribution elsewhere. I couldn't confirm that, to be honest, but certainly in terms of the policy perspective, the onus is actually on the local authority to ensure that there's up-to-date evidence available to demonstrate that a lower threshold can be applied. In this particular case, whilst we have a housing register, we certainly don't have an up-to-date housing needs survey for Long Buckby to demonstrate that that provision is necessary. Furthermore, there's certainly no shortage of affordable housing provision in Long Buckby, having regard to the wider development that's been approved, and also to the developments, series of developments which have occurred within Long Buckby, which have provided 40% affordable housing provision.
Thank you, Chung. We certainly have.
Chair, can I just say though? I mean, we've also had housing developments that haven't fulfilled their affordable housing provision locally. There's lots of things, and it's like, you know, if it's up to us, we have a policy in place. It's like, why haven't we got up-to-date housing needs survey? I also remember a little while ago in Weedon, where we didn't have an up-to-date housing needs survey, but we were quite willing to say that they couldn't build them because we didn't have an up-to-date housing needs survey. It seems to me at some points we want our cake and eat it, depending on which way we're looking.
The Weedon one was a bit different. That was
yes, it was different, Chair. But I'm just saying,
outside the village.
I'm just saying, Chair, that we were saying one thing, and we're saying the onus was on us to provide the housing needs survey. And why didn't we? Why? So how come that came into play? I'm just saying that it's different rules at different times.
Yeah, but it's a different situation as well. Right, the next person is Councillor Ritchie.
Very briefly, Chair, I totally agree with everything that Councillor Wesley has said. We pay lip service to the idea of affordable housing, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, we just roll over when a developer says that no, that they're not going to do it. I think it would be shameful if we let this go through.
Thank you. There is one heck of a lot of affordable housing on this site and the other site opposite as well. We've had some probably 300 houses, and there's one heck of a percentage of affordable housing.
We're told we should look at every application on its merits.
That's quite true. Councillor Dabbs.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm echoing really what Councillor Wesley and Councillor Ritchie have said. I can't help but feel that this is just a cynical ploy to avoid providing social housing. I did write a note on my papers wondering what the affordable housing contribution was, but it seems like we don't know how much that is, but I suggest perhaps it will be a lot less than getting 4 houses worth of affordable housing. In my opinion, I think we should reject it. We should have the 10 houses with the full affordable housing content. The other alternative is perhaps we defer and we get a housing needs survey done. That would be my suggestion. But at the moment, I would suggest that we refuse. Question is, under what can we refuse it for? Can we refuse for underuse of the site, which is what it mentions in the report?
No, that's not a planning reason. We already have a proposal anyway, so if that proposal's voted down, you can suggest another proposal, Councillor Dabbs. Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody else wish to speak, Maria? No.
Councillor Dabbs and Councillor James, but before we go there, can I just say that the requirement for affordable housing in the villages is 40%. The case officers will correct me if I'm wrong. And sometimes if the developer is unable to provide affordable housing on a development, then they have to provide the money to build affordable housing elsewhere, commuted sums at an agreed level, and that does provide the number of missing units. And you'll have seen reports go through to strategy group and council where those sums have been awarded to new schemes.
Right. Yeah.
But it isn't actually clear in here whether there's going to be a commuted sum, but I would say it doesn't look like it, because basically this applicant will not agree to providing affordable housing, and it appears that policy are recommending to go with this because of the argument between, well, we've got a 5 house unit policy, but the national planning policy framework says 10. But
That's
the
right.
can correct me if I'm wrong.
Councillor James. Councillor James, you wish to speak? You're muted.
Unmute. Thank you,
You're
Chairman.
okay now. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things there. One, although we don't have an up-to-date housing needs survey for Long Buckby, we don't have a housing shortage in the rural areas, or indeed an affordable housing shortage. And those were the 2 reasons that were advanced in this case. So, you know, in my opinion, my own personal opinion, I've always considered, and I think I've made it known to other members, that the number 5 policy is unrealistic, and it should have been 10 right from the start. But there we are. we will come up against this again, I'm quite sure, in due course. So I'm quite happy with this application, and you know, I should be voting for it.
Thank you. Any more speakers, Maria?
No, Chairman.
Okay, we have a proposal the application be approved, which has been seconded. All those in favour, please tell Maria whether you're for approving it or not, or against it.
Chair, I've had my electronic hand raised, but I've been ignored.
I beg your pardon then, Councillor Ritchie.
However,
is the quick one.
Yes, and I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to put it back to Councillor James, that if he says that there is no real need for more affordable housing, and there's no need for any more housing, then why on earth are we approving it if we don't need housing?
I think he said affordable. Actually, we don't need housing either. No, it's additional. Yeah. Okay, so going back to what I just said, we have a proposal that be approved, which has been seconded. All those in favour say to Maria when she asks you.
Councillor Chandler.
For.
Councillor Cribbin.
For.
Councillor Dabbs.
Against.
Councillor Frost.
Abstain.
Councillor Harris.
Against.
Councillor Irving Swift.
For.
Councillor James.
For.
Councillor Longley.
For.
Councillor Matton.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
Against.
Councillor Robertson.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Wesley.
Against.
1, 4, 9.
941. Yeah. 9 in favour, 4 against, 1 abstention.
Thank you. The application is approved. And that, ladies and gentlemen, at 8 minutes past 10 concludes the meeting. I'm sorry it's so long, but it could have been even longer if we'd have had the other two as well. So thank you all for attending, and thanks for your contributions. And we'll
Thank
see
you,
again.
Chairman.
See you again in 3 or 4 weeks.
No, 3.
3 weeks.